This mountain village kid lying around watching clouds when some old man walks up and tells him a monster's closing in. The kid doesn't flinch, doesn't even bother sitting up. A few hours later, Turan catches the smell of blood in the air. He heads into the forest and finds old man Rebus lying there dead. The monster was real after all. He's looking at this gruesome scene and he still doesn't feel fear. Then the monster comes back, a giant demon tiger, its dark aura rolling off it like smoke. But the second it roars, it's the tiger that backs off. Its instincts are screaming at it. This human is dangerous, so it decides to play it safe. Turan realizes the creature isn't coming any closer, so he pulls out a small stone, loads it into a leather sling, and his eyes light up. That's magic. The next shot tears the air apart, an attack so brutal it wipes the monster out in one hit. And through all of it, Turan doesn't even blink, which is strange, because 8 years ago when he was 10, he was already using magic. His mother caught him levitating objects and it terrified her. She made him swear to keep it secret, to never let the world know what he could do. The reason was simple. Everyone believed mages carried the divine blood of the Freyans, so mages saw themselves as something above human. And even the strongest warriors, the knights, get treated like slaves under them. That's when his mother told him the truth. His father was a knight. If the mages ever found out their bloodline had slipped into someone like Turan, it wouldn't be an inconvenience. It would be a war they'd start just to erase him. Mages don't get born from people without divine blood, period. So Turan grows up alone, at the edge of some village nobody's ever heard of. Mother's long dead. And the morning after he wipes out a monster with a rock, the villagers show up at his front door like a mob with an agenda. They want a name for Rebus's murder, and Turan's it. He can't even process how fast they jumped there. Then one of them grabs him by the collar and says it to his face. Everyone thinks he killed the old man and is trying to pin it on some monster that doesn't exist. Turan's done being polite, tells them straight up they're pathetic. First guy loses it, throws a punch. Turan slips it without even looking annoyed, thinks about it for half a second, and decides these people only speak one language, a headbutt, and the guy's out cold. The next one behind him raises a club and drops like a sack of bricks. Another one tries to land a hit, but Turan grabs his arm and makes him taste his own punch. One by one, they all go down, humiliated. Grown men against an 18-year-old. The women are standing there too, but none of them want any part of this fight. Turan walks back inside, and someone else knocks on his door. He's already fed up, but this time it's not a villager. A tall man carrying himself with real presence. He's polite too, and mentions he's traveled a long way to get here. Turan's about to point him toward the village, tell him he's headed the wrong way, when the man's stomach lets out a loud growl. A few minutes later, the guy's sitting at Turan's table, eating, and that's when things get interesting. They talk about how Turan's lived alone his whole life, never once left this place, and yet the man notices something. Turan eats like someone who was actually raised right. Turan tells him his mother raised him here, alone, taught him everything he knows. She died of illness a few years back. Then the man drops it. He's a mage, sent here to kill a high-rank monster in this territory. Turan stays calm and tells him about the old man's body. The mage starts piecing things together out loud, pointing out that Turan doesn't act like someone living next door to danger. No fear, not even a flinch. His tone turns serious as he asks Turan one question. Who is he really? In a flashback, a young Turan asks his mother why no one can know he's a mage. His mother explains that it's because of the wicked nobles, which only confuses the young boy. She explains that if nobles are the shepherds, then the knights are their sheep. She says nobles might treat their sheep with love, like family, but they won't hesitate to sell or sacrifice them if they have to. She tells him she doesn't want that kind of life for him and asks if he wants to keep living by her side. When the boy happily says yes, she tells him that in that case, he must never let anyone find out he is a mage. She warns him that other mages, in particular, would do anything to tear them apart and turn him into a sheep if they ever discovered the truth. She concludes by telling him that to keep his secret, he might even have to kill people. It's clear that Turan has now reached a point where his very life is about to be put to the test. Turan realizes this guy is trying to corner him. The man notices the young shepherd is staying completely silent. Smiling, the man says the joke isn't any fun if he keeps making that face. To Turan, this doesn't feel like a joke at all, so he makes it clear that he doesn't really have a sense of humor for this kind of stuff. Pretending he isn't intimidated, Turan says it's the first time he's ever heard a joke about mages. The man apologizes, saying Turan's expression was just too good, so he couldn't resist teasing him. The man introduces himself as Kiorn, a nomad. After introducing themselves, Turan and Kiorn shake hands. Both of them find it interesting to form a connection right then and there. With the table full of food, they keep talking, sharing stories about their pasts and their ages. The 18-year-old and the 65-year-old talk about how slowly mages age. Turan asks how the older man ended up becoming a nomad. Kiorn explains that after serving a great family for 65 years, he decided to just set off and travel the world. It had been a really long time since Turan had such a casual, innocent conversation, especially with someone so friendly. The young man had never realized just talking to someone could be this much fun. They get so caught up in their chat that they don't even notice the sun coming up. After their pleasant chat, the nomad places an Arabian silver coin on the table, saying it should be enough to cover the meal. Turan gladly accepts the coin and wishes his new friend good luck on his hunt. Kiorn tells him they shouldn't say goodbye like they'll never see each other again, since he can always swing by for a visit whenever he's in the area. The scene shifts to a small, quiet countryside town. The place is full of trees and open fields. There is the young shepherd again, calling his sheep together. The sheep always listen to his voice and do exactly what he says. As the sheep head to where they are supposed to go, Turan gets lost in thought, realizing he's never met anyone quite like Kiorn before. It was really nice talking to him, and his easygoing natural humor was actually pretty comforting. He got a great impression of Kiorn, thinking he was better than any adult he had ever met in his life. As he gathers the animals, Turan thinks to himself that knights are just emotionless hunting dogs used by arrogant nobles. He figures they probably won't cross paths again, since there aren't any monsters left in the area. But as it turns out, the nomad soon notices the lack of monsters himself. Kiorn spots the tracks of an intense battle, but he can't sense the presence of any monsters nearby. It's obvious that the monster living here has already been hunted down. Scars from the battle are scattered all over the place. Looking up at a tree, the man wonders if the village chief hired another mage besides him. Either way, with the monsters gone, things around here should go back to being peaceful. But suddenly, he senses an overwhelming presence that makes his professional hunter eyes go wide. The man looks around frantically, trying to pinpoint where this massive energy is coming from. The monster has massive paws, and its sheer presence is absolutely terrifying. The creature looks absolutely hideous, smells awful, and has enough mana to fight for over 2 days straight. This thing is definitely a monster's specter, and the nomad hunter can't help but wonder who could have created something like this. But he doesn't have time to waste, because if he stays here too long, the creature is going to catch him. The intense fight begins as the monster raises its massive paw, forcing the man to quickly dodge out of the way. His first move is lightning fast, dodging the attack almost instantly. As he faces down the monster, he recalls that if someone doesn't absorb or disperse the mana from a creature's corpse, it eventually turns into a specter. Any experienced mage who hunts monsters knows this, and the battle rages on. It's clear that whoever took down the original monster was indeed a mage, but Kiorn doesn't understand why they let the body turn into a specter, or if they just didn't know it would happen. After dodging a few more times and preparing his counterattack, he realizes a rookie knight wouldn't have what it takes to defeat a monster of this caliber. He figures there must be more to this story, but either way, it's his duty to destroy the creature. The man readies his powerful mana spear, determined to put an end to the monster once and for all. But the unexpected happens, and his attack is completely neutralized before it can even hit the target. With that, he realizes the monster's mana is way stronger than his own. Suddenly, the creature turns into a puddle of black mud and completely disappears. He notices the monster is actually intelligent and is trying to alter the magic using its own mana. Now, the monster begins hunting the experienced warrior. The massive creature appears right behind him, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Even so, the hunter is highly experienced and senses the incoming attack just in time. This monster is way out of Kiorn's league. It would take at least a low-ranking noble to defeat it. In the middle of the clash against the beast, the man ends up getting hit. He never imagined he'd encounter such a powerful specter in a normal village. Faced with this desperate situation, he accepts that life is full of surprises. Still, he makes it clear to the monster that he's not going to just close his eyes and die. Gritting his teeth, he decides that if he's going down, he's taking the creature with him. Kiorn concentrates all his mana into his hand, planning to pierce the monster the second it attacks. Since this giant isn't playing around, his timing has to be absolutely perfect. With all his mana gathered in his hand, he prepares to unleash a massive blast of fire. This is the final showdown between man and monster, where only one of them will walk away. Suddenly, a bright blue light flashes in the distance. Before the hunter can even launch his attack, someone else beats him to it and strikes the monster. The man is left completely speechless, staring at the scene in disbelief. In an instant, the giant monster collapses to the ground, defeated without Kiorn having to lift a finger. He looks around, trying to figure out who just saved his life. Then, he's startled by a voice joking that the story about the shepherd was good, but this rescue came at a much better time. It turns out his savior is the young man he was traveling with, who walks up to him with absolute confidence. Kiorn finds it strange that they talked all night, and the kid never mentioned he was a mage. Curious, he asks why he didn't say anything about his abilities earlier. The young man shrugs it off with a casual reply, saying he could have just left him behind to die. As he speaks, the young man remembers the kindness the hunter showed him, even though they were complete strangers. He remembered the time he chased away the wolf that was preying on the local sheep. Back then, he had asked the man why he went so far out of his way to help people. They started talking about how much money someone with such incredible powers could make. But the man's answer left him confused, as he explained he only did it because he put himself in other people's shoes. He talked about the people living on the borders, trembling in fear with absolutely no protection. Turan had a completely different outlook back then, arguing that having strength didn't mean you were obligated to protect the weak. The man replied that mages naturally inherited their power from a god, so they should live with pride and protect the commoners. In reality, though, not every mage thought that way, and everyone had their own beliefs and lifestyle. That was why Turan threw his own words back at him, saying everyone has their own way of living. As they were talking, they were suddenly caught off guard by a massive surge of energy. The experienced mage warned Turan to listen closely, telling him they couldn't handle this monster. He explained that unless you were a noble, fighting a creature this powerful was completely impossible. Staring into the monster's giant green eyes, the man told Turan to warn the village chief and help everyone evacuate. He said he would hold the line alone, trying to sound confident, even though he knew he wouldn't last long against the beast. Turan seemed to listen to the man, but at the same time he noticed something in the air was changing. An ordinary rock began to vibrate as it charged up with mana. The man looked over and realized this young knight hiding out in the mountains was capable of hunting beasts that even nobles would struggle with. The veteran knight, Kiorn, thought about this, his eyes wide with shock. What he was witnessing now wasn't just a simple connection he made in some backwater village. It wasn't just the bravery of a young knight who had run away from the nobility either. The scene playing out before his eyes looked like the birth of a mage who would change the entire world. Now Turan stood right in front of the monster. He said he had always been curious to find out what his own limits were. The man replied that as surprising as Turan's talent was, their opponent was still way too strong. He warned him that they needed to team up and fight together. Suddenly, a heavy blow was launched right at them. The man unleashed a yellow energy, but realized he would only get in the way, since he couldn't even react to that last attack. He lowered his hand, knowing it was useless. Now, all he could do was trust the young man's talent as he watched Turan launch his attack. Turan carefully observed the situation for a moment. Turan muttered that his attack wasn't working. The man explained that he couldn't defeat a specter using physical attacks alone. As the monster closed in, Turan asked how he was supposed to beat it. The man replied that fire would work, so Turan immediately started preparing a fire attack. He added that lightning would also do the trick. Turan fired a blast of flames directly at the monster. Turan complained that it didn't work again, but the man explained that wasn't the issue. The man thought to himself that using a mage's power required a proper foundation and basic skills, making him wonder if Turan didn't even know the basics. Suddenly, his eyes widened as a realization hit him. He remembered that Turan was the one who killed the monster and turned it into a specter in the first place, which meant Turan had never actually absorbed mana in his entire life. Turan gets blown back. The man yells at him to not just summon the fire, but shoot it immediately. Turan wastes no time and springs into action. He starts conjuring fire in his hand. Creating fire isn't that hard, but actually controlling the flames takes special training. Turan raises his arm as the flames grow even stronger. There's no point in waiting if he can use this power right now, so he plants his feet firmly on the ground. This helps him brace for the impact as he launches the flames at the monster. This catches the wraith's attention, and a green glow shines brightly through the fire. The monster needs to be completely consumed by the flames. The knight tells Turan to stay focused and keep feeding mana into the fire so it doesn't go out. His goal is to burn the wraith to ashes. As the flames flare up, Turan's expression completely changes amidst the chaos. With all his mana concentrated, the fire engulfing the wraith grows massive. The knight just watches with pride, knowing they've won a hard-fought battle. Normally, it would take the power of a noble to handle a situation like this. He's amazed that a totally inexperienced kid managed to defeat the monster. With the job done, Turan turns to the knight and asks if it's finally over. The knight warns him that if he doesn't want to run into another wraith, he needs to absorb its mana right now. He explains how to do it, telling Turan to tilt his hand slightly and imagine he's draining the energy. Turan takes the advice, closes his eyes, and tries to calm his mind. Slowly, he feels that strange green flow of mana entering his body. This is the first time Turan has ever absorbed power, and the feeling is incredible. As the energy flows into him, the color of his eyes shifts for a split second. The power seems to surge through all his vital points at once. Feeling all that strength inside him, Turan finally understands what mana really is. The knight mentions that the sensation can be quite addictive, but then he stares in sheer disbelief. He realizes this really is the first time Turan has ever absorbed mana. He knows that after awakening, mana usually grows slowly over time, and the fastest way to get stronger is by defeating monsters or other mages. The knight is blown away, confirming the kid has never done this before. This means Turan has an insane amount of raw, natural potential. The man calls out to him. Man calls. Putting a hand to his chest, he admits he was too harsh on him and asks which noble house he belongs to. Turan replies that he's from the house of Kiorn. Then he asks the man to help him clean up this mess first. A little while later, the two of them are in a different area. The man apologizes for being so rude and making someone of his status do that kind of work. Turan closes his eyes and says he's nobody important, just a shepherd who never even knew his father. The man looks annoyed and tells Turan not to look at him like that. He asks why such a powerful mage is working as a shepherd, pointing out that, no offense, that lifestyle doesn't suit him at all. Turan explains that it was actually his mother's request, and she insisted he live this way until the day she passed away. He says that if he ever revealed he was a mage, he would have just ended up being used and thrown away. The man agrees, commenting that his mother was a very wise woman. Turan admits he's surprised, as he expected the man to say she was just being overprotective, but the man reiterates that she was absolutely right. The man lowers his head and explains that mages with great power are always dragged into conflicts, pointing out that 20 years ago, a massive war broke out between two noble houses. He explains it was a war between House Arabian, the family he served, and the great House Zahar, where countless people lost their lives. Out of about 3,000 Arabian knights, nearly a third died in that battle. Turan just listens as the man reveals that everyone close to him was among that tragic third who died. The man remembers his friend Denver, who planned to open a laundry shop after the war, and even his teacher, who always scolded him for having so much left to learn. Both died. Even his family lost their lives, all of them deeply affected by House Zahar, leaving him as the sole survivor. Lowering his head, the man repeats that Turan's mother was right, because a knight's life can vanish much faster than a commoner's. He adds that the only thing wrong with her logic was Turan's actual talent. Scratching his head, the man admits it's embarrassing to say, but Turan easily defeated the monster's specter, something he couldn't even manage himself. He claims Turan's potential doesn't compare to an ordinary knight's, saying he's at least on the level of a noble. The man looks closely at Turan and assures him that his talent is exceptionally high. Turan mentions his mother used to say his father was a knight, but now he realizes that was probably a lie. The man stands up and advises Turan to leave this mountain and explore the world. He explains that to them, humans are more than just knights and nobles, yet humans are still not the true masters of this world. He says it's highly likely there's a greater force pulling the strings behind the ruling families. It was that force that triggered the massive war, wiping out most members of the families involved. The old man apologizes to young Turan, realizing he forgot that the boy still doesn't know much about magic. He understands it's only natural for Turan to have so many questions about his own lineage. The old man knows that searching for these answers is the least Turan should do, and that to find them, he'll have to face the world head on. No matter what happens, the man promises to support and guide the young man on his journey of self-discovery. He emphasizes that there's a massive world out there, waiting for Turan to explore it. He says all he needs to do is leave this dark place behind and live his life with a new purpose. As someone who has lived for his own goals for 65 years, he has more than enough experience to show the young man just how vast the world really is. The old man warns him that he might run into people far stronger than himself along the way, but he should still learn from everything life throws at him. Turan listens intently to everything the old man is teaching him. After all, up until this point, he had no one to openly explain magic and its fundamentals to him. Still, he can't help but wonder why someone from a rival family is making things so easy and explaining so much to him. But to the old man, young Turan isn't an enemy. He's the person who saved his life and healed his wounds. He explains that special abilities are traits the nobles inherited from their ancestors, the Freyans. He also mentions that there are spells that seem incredibly simple and effortless when someone actually uses magic. Turan explains he's not actually that strong, but that he just has the physical capabilities of a mage and uses mana to boost his agility. He mentions he has a sharp sense of smell and is good at throwing stones, wondering if that might be a trait from his lineage. The man responds that being skilled with throwing weapons is actually one of the defining traits of House Arabian, though he admits it's also a pretty common trait among several other great lineages. Suddenly, Turan notices the man's expression grow dark, as if he realizes what's actually going on. There must be one specific noble house that is truly responsible for Turan's abilities. Looking visibly annoyed, the man realizes it has to be one of the great houses, a house known as the Stalkers, or the Hunters. They were the very same ones who fought in the Great War, the Zahar family, the sworn enemies of the Arabian. This completely deflates Turan, as it's the last thing he wanted to hear. After everything he'd been through, this was definitely not what he was hoping for. The shock is written all over his face. Turan looks at his friend, realizing he just found out he shares the same bloodline as his friend's enemies. He wonders what he should even say, wanting to apologize, but he knows those war crimes were committed by relatives he never even met. Kiorn notices how visibly uncomfortable the young man has become, so Kiorn puts a hand on Turan's shoulder and tells him not to worry so much. Turan is relieved to hear Kiorn say he never wanted to be part of that war anyway. Kiorn explains that all of that was just the business of the adults who fought in the past. Even though he's relieved, Turan still wants to know if the elder has any regrets, especially when it comes to letting him go free to explore the world. With a sad look, the elder says that leaving the mountain to seek power will inevitably draw Turan to the Zahar family. He knows the young man has extraordinary abilities, but in the end, he says he trusts him. Kiorn points to the kindness Turan showed by saving him, even though it meant revealing an identity he had hidden his entire life. He says that if someone like Turan joined the Zahar family and rose to a high position, a new war could actually be avoided. The two say their goodbyes and decide to drop the subject, though they both know they'll see each other again. Even though he encouraged Turan to forge his own path, the man can't help but still feel worried. At the same time, it's good to see that Turan is determined to leave the mountain for noble reasons. Kiorn knows the young man has made up his mind and seems very confident in his choice. Turan makes it clear to the elder that he won't leave until their wounds are fully healed. He suggests using their remaining time together for the man to give him some tips on how to use his power and mana. Drawing on all his experience, Kiorn explains that mana is often called the key to omnipotence. He says it's not literal omnipotence, but to use magic, you need a mana type that matches the spell. He explains that the difficulty of magic is determined by 3 factors: bloodline, affinity, and casualty. Turan learns that the first factor is birth bloodline, which applies to most nobles who aren't knights. Kiorn gives an example, saying it would be extremely difficult for Turan to heal his own wounds using magic. However, for those with the Southern Ravista bloodline, healing comes naturally without any training at all. Listening to the explanation, Turan realizes the second factor, affinity, is basically how familiar you are with an element. Essentially, a mage can perform certain tasks much easier if they are used to doing them or prefer doing them that way. The man says that if Turan had tried to create ordinary, simple flames, he would have never reached that speed or power from before. Looking at a mug of water, Kiorn explains that the final factor is the most important, casualty, though even he doesn't fully understand it. He asks the young man what would happen if he tried to destroy the mug directly using only mana. Kiorn concentrates mana in his hands to demonstrate what happens when there is a lack of casualty. He explains that without proper casualty, the goal you want to achieve becomes extremely difficult. The young man says he more or less gets what he means by that. Turan decides to use his own flames to explain his understanding, saying it's like he needs to find a cause for them to be extinguished. Hearing this, the man feels proud, thinking Turan could easily be a scholar instead of a mage. Still, the young man has his doubts and asks if he could also control normal animals if he wanted to. The man explains that magical beasts need that kind of connection because of his mana. Even though he understood most of the explanation, Turan still thinks magic is really hard to wrap his head around. He asks if the Zahar family has special powers, and the man explains they are indeed highly skilled in stealth and tracking. With that, the man challenges the boy to try using this ability just once. Turan accepts the challenge since he doesn't want other people spotting him wandering around anyway. He closes his eyes and concentrates, focusing on masking his scent and any sounds he makes. After vanishing right in front of the elder, Turan asks if it worked. The man is blown away that the boy managed to pull it off on his very first try. Once he gets over his shock, the nomad tells the young man that he successfully executed the technique. He looks all around, hoping to catch even a tiny trace of Turan's presence. But the truth is, Turan really did become completely invisible to the man's eyes. After a moment, the young man calmly reappears. The elder says it's been a long time since he last saw that power, calling it a chilling ability. He mentions that during the war, the Knights of Arabion were terrified of this technique because it felt so unfair. The man explains that Turan doesn't actually become invisible, which is why he's going to teach him some magic training methods. Turan is confused by his friend's generosity, thinking he's teaching way too much to a mage from an enemy family. But the man doesn't see it that way. He feels he's just helping out the person who saved his life and took care of him. Later, the bald village elder thinks it's unbelievable that the young man just wants to sell his sheep and leave. Noticing the boy's stubbornness, the old man asks who's going to be the shepherd now, complaining that it's unfair for him to just up and leave without consulting anyone. Turan replies that finding a new shepherd is their problem to figure out. He says he just expects them to buy the sheep for a fair price, otherwise he'll just set them all free before he goes. The young man makes it clear they can try to round up the animals themselves, but warns them it won't be easy. The old man knows Turan is incredibly sharp and always keeps his word. Knowing they have nothing to gain by making the boy angry, the villagers decide to pay him what he asked. With the money in hand, Turan walks off quietly with his new friend. Turan points out that the villagers still owe his friend compensation and asks if he should go collect it. His friend shows zero interest in the money, since Turan was the one who actually captured the magical beast. Turan shrugs it off, deciding he doesn't really care about their money either. Finally, the time comes for the two of them to go their separate ways. Karen apologizes to the young man for turning down the offer to travel together, admitting he feels more comfortable on his own. Even though he had considered traveling as a duo, Turan accepts the decision easily, thinking that traveling solo will be a good experience anyway. The man just tells the young man to take care of himself and live a life without regrets. Turan replies that he hopes they can meet again in happier times. The boy stands there, watching Karen's figure fade into the distance for a long time. Only then does he realize why the warrior didn't want to speak too formally with him. Even though his mother never lacked in affection, Turan had secretly always missed having a father figure in his life. He wanted someone he could look up to, a model for the kind of man he wanted to become. The scene shifts to a completely barren desert. Footprints appear in the dirt of the empty wasteland. Turan keeps walking, making his way through the desolate area. He senses something is off and stops to take a closer look around. He looks up at the sky, lost in thought. In the distance, he spots a group of nomadic merchants who travel from village to village. Turan is relieved to see them, glad he finally has someone to talk to. He decides to head over and ask them for directions. One of the men asks who he is and why he's blocking their way, so Turan explains he's just a traveler and asks where the nearest town is. The men look him over and tell him that if he keeps going down the road they just came from, he'll hit a town called Nure. Turan steps aside and thanks them for the help, but before he can walk away, one of the men steps in front of him and tells him to hold on. The man asks if he really thought he could just get his directions and walk off. Turan asks what he means by that, and the man replies that when you get something, you're supposed to give something in return. Right then, the other men draw their swords, and one of them demands that Turan hand over his bag. Turan asks if they're bandits. The leader tells him he's pretty careless, pointing out they're in the middle of a desert where no one would ever find a body. Aiming his weapon, the leader tells him to hand over his backpack and leave while they're still being nice, since killing him and stripping his clothes would just be a hassle. Turan looks at the man and points out that bandits who kill people usually don't end up with happy endings. He remembers an important conversation he had with a friend. He also recalls how he's supposed to control his mana. His friend's words echo in his mind. Turan tells himself he'll just have to use this group of bandits for target practice. He watches the men closely. The bandits point their swords at Turan and start laughing, mocking him for talking like he's some kind of actual mage. Turan moves his hand and casts his magic. He summons a powerful tornado that sweeps up all the bandits at once. He realizes that if he shapes the wind with his hand before boosting its power, it uses way less mana. He didn't think he could create such strong winds with so little energy, and as he processes this, the bandits start getting back up. Turan gets another spell ready, grabbing his canteen and controlling the water inside. He shapes the floating liquid into sharp points. In an instant, the water hardens into sharp icicles. One of the bandits sees this and completely panics. The man doesn't even have time to run before getting blasted head-on by the attack. Despite the result, Turan isn't too impressed with the spell, thinking that just throwing regular rocks would have been way more efficient. The bandit leader drops to his knees, saying they had no idea he was a mage, and begging for mercy just this once. While the leader keeps begging and promises to give him everything if he spares them, several other bandits try to sneak up on Turan from behind. But Turan hears them coming and lifts his foot. Stomping on the ground, he shoots earth spikes out of the dirt, impaling everyone trying to ambush him. The leader can't believe his eyes, thinking it's impossible for anyone to be this powerful. He's completely paralyzed with fear as he looks at his entire crew lying on the ground. Turan walks up to the leader and tells him he's going to ask him a question. He wants to know why they attacked so recklessly, considering any traveler they run into could be a mage. The bandit answers that it was because Turan bowed his head. He explains that even when they were rude, Turan just bowed and greeted them, making them think he was just some weak nobody. Turan thanks him, saying he learned something useful from that. The bandit then asks if he can be spared, but his hopes shatter when he sees a droplet of water hovering right over his head. At that moment, Turan remembers a piece of advice from Kiorn. Kiorn told him to never show mercy to bandits, because they wouldn't hesitate to hurt other people. Looking at an object on the table, Turan reflects on why everyone is so ruthless with these kinds of people. He realizes that sparing one evil life could end up costing the lives of many innocent people. Looking down at the fallen leader, Turan says he's already wasted too much time there. He starts following the tracks left by the bandits' wagons in the dirt. Still, he can't stop thinking about what he just did. That was the first time he had ever taken a life. Turan feels guilty, but he knows he couldn't let them go after Kiorn's warning. People who rob and kill without hesitation will just claim more victims later. As the wagon tracks fade away, Turan's racing heart calms down as he remembers Kiorn's teachings. At the end of the road, a whole new world opens up before him. Turan is amazed by how massive the place is. This is the town of Murray. Crowds of people are bustling back and forth through the streets. The sight startles Turan, who has never seen so many people in one place before. Even the architecture of the buildings is completely different from his old village. He thinks to himself that this finally feels like a real city. He approaches a fruit stall. The owner asks what he wants, but Turan explains he's not buying anything. He remembers Kiorn told him to look for a tavern to rest as soon as he arrived. The vendor gets annoyed and tells him to beat it if he's not buying. Turan thinks the man is incredibly rude and wonders if it's a city rule that you have to buy fruit before asking questions. He points to a piece of fruit and asks the price, and the man tells him it's too dupit. Noticing Turan's confusion, the vendor mentions he accepts other currencies too. While paying, Turan asks where the nearest tavern is. The vendor points him in the right direction and says it's the biggest tavern in town. When Turan walks into the tavern, he's greeted by one of the staff. He asks her how much it costs to stay for a night. The staff member quickly replies that a room is 16 dupit. Turan agrees to the price and pays for the room. Right after, he asks if there are any monsters nearby with active bounties on them. Turan knows he needs to hunt monsters to absorb mana and make some money at the same time. Turan looks at her and asks why she isn't answering. The receptionist smiles and tells him that nothing in this world is free. Turan pays for the information, and she tells him he needs to go to City Hall, but Turan has no idea what that is and asks her. The receptionist is completely shocked that he doesn't even know what a City Hall is. She explains that City Hall is the place that handles all the town's public affairs. She mentions it's probably closed by now since it's night, so he should head over there tomorrow. Then she asks if he's a monster hunter, but once again, Turan has no clue what she's talking about. She explains that if a normal person hunts monsters, they can become a mage, and asks if that's what he's after. She adds that anyone who actually believes in those superstitions is an idiot. Suddenly, a man behind them speaks up, saying it's not a superstition because he saw it happen with his own eyes. The receptionist brightens up and asks Madan if he's still alive, and he replies that he won't die until he becomes a mage. Turan gets annoyed by the man's hand on his shoulder, so Midan quickly pulls his hand back and apologizes. Curious, Turan asks the man if he can tell him more about that. Midan explains that mages get stronger by absorbing mana from monsters, and that regular people can become mages by doing the exact same thing. Midan points to his companions and says the four of them are hunting together so they can all become mages. Turan asks if any of them are actually mages yet, but they say no, only the Lord and his 3 mages can use magic. Midan asks how Turan hunts monsters with his current gear, and asks to see his weapon. Turan shows him his slingshot, and Midan remarks that based on how worn it is, Turan must get into plenty of fights. Midan says that with a weapon like that, he could hunt monsters like rabbits and foxes. He then offers Turan a spot as the marksman in their group. Turan thanks him but declines the offer. Later, lying in bed, Turan thinks to himself that he has no reason to hunt with that group. He reflects on how chaotic his day has been. Turan still can't believe he actually left his village. He wonders what lies ahead for him from now on. Suddenly, he hears a noise, sits up in bed, and demands to know who's there. He recalls his conversation with Kiorn and wonders if he really has to stay on high alert, even inside an inn. In his memory, Kiorn answers yes, warning him that the city isn't necessarily safe. Kiorn tells him to never ever let his guard down. As he approaches the door, Turan already starts prepping a spell with his other hand. He finally opens the door and confronts the visitor. The visitor is Lena, who asks him if he was already asleep. She says she thought he might be cold and came to warm him up a bit. She starts mysteriously offering him her services. Turan asks what she's talking about, and she replies that it's exactly what it looks like. She explains that for a small fee, she'll do whatever he wants. She considers the possibility that he might not want anything, but assumes he's just playing hard to get. She tells him that his desire is written all over his face. Despite what she says, Turan's face remains completely calm, like a meditating Buddha. Turan remembers how desperate Kiorn sounded when warning him about women who offered these kinds of services. Turan remembers Kiorn's warnings to always watch out for the maids and escorts at taverns. Kiorn used to say that people with mana have high resistance to diseases and don't really suffer from them, but they can easily pass them on to others. He warned Turan not to let his urges get the best of him, adding that city life was tough. After the woman storms downstairs in a rage, Turan lies in bed thinking about how he was charged for information first at the fruit stand, and now by that young woman. It seems like city folks charge you for every little conversation or piece of information, making him think urban life is pretty heartless. While Turan is lost in thought, a group of people who are not happy with his behavior head up the stairs. The gang leader comments that Turan seems pretty useless but talks too much, which makes him the perfect bait. The leader thinks back to his younger days, and the fact that Turan hunts with that specific kind of weapon makes him a bit uneasy. He figures if Turan has even 1% of his past strength, he'll survive, because he is none other than the monster hunter Midum. Back in his room, Turan thinks that maybe city folks aren't so heartless after all. If that's the case, he can't wait to see what lies ahead. Before long, the next day begins. As soon as Turan arrives at a certain spot, he is greeted. He wonders if the man standing there is some kind of official. Turan announces that he's there to hunt monsters. Whenever someone treats him coldly, Turan remembers the wise old man telling him the world wouldn't always be kind. The old man explained there was no reason for people to be nice for free, but he shared an easy way to get respect. All you had to do was reveal you were a mage, and regular people would treat you like a god. Recalling this, Turan looks over the paper the man shows him, intending to just look and hand it back. Since he can't take the paper with him, Turan studies the drawing of the monster carefully. The drawing shows some kind of crow monster. Without paying much attention to Turan, the man says it's unlikely he'll manage to kill the creature, but if he does, he needs to bring back proof. He explains that if a mage doesn't use mana to disperse the monster's corpse, it will turn into a wraith. The man makes it clear that killing a monster and just leaving it behind is a crime punishable by execution. Turan already knows this, and he knows exactly what happens when they turn into wraiths. After studying the monster closely, Turan hands back the poster and asks if knights hunt monsters too. Realizing the man is incredibly rude and won't give him a straight answer, Turan decides to just leave. After a moment, the man realizes Turan stopped talking and simply walked out. Watching the young man leave, the man assumes he'll just end up getting killed and doesn't actually expect him to bring back the beast. But as it turns out, the dead monster is dumped right there as proof of the hunter's success. Everyone stares in absolute shock, unable to believe their eyes. They try to figure out how Turan managed to hunt and bring back a monster like that. The man starts firing off questions, making it sound like an interrogation. After Turan confirms he hunted the beast all by himself, he asks how much the reward is. The reward money is quickly handed over to Turan as payment for the job. Even after paying him, the men keep examining the monster, amazed that its wings are completely intact. They've never seen a blade-winged crow in such perfect condition. Turan just stands there, waiting for something. Now that this job is done, he wants to know if there are any other monsters to hunt. Turan continues to completely shock the residents of this small town. Even after hearing his request, the men still can't seem to believe he actually wants to hunt more monsters. After making a good amount of money, Turan heads back to his inn and orders a massive meal. Looking at all the empty plates on the table, the blonde girl admits she never expected him to be this strong. She's amazed that he managed to hunt 30 monsters in just 3 days and make so much cash, while Turan just focuses on stuffing his face. Turan then makes it clear to her that the money isn't his main goal. He explains that his real objective is to absorb the monster's mana, and thanks to that mana, he can feel himself getting way stronger. As she keeps talking, Turan thinks back to all the mana he's absorbed so far. He realizes his mana has increased insanely compared to back when he was with Kjorn, but he also knows there's a limit to how much he can grow just by absorbing weak monsters, and that he'll plateau if he keeps this up. Turan changes the subject and asks the girl if she stole some of his food. She defends herself, saying he ate the whole thing, and jokes about how someone so skinny can eat so much. Even the cook is happy to see a customer enjoying his food that much. Turan just replies that he ate so much because everything tasted amazing. Suddenly, someone grabs Turan's shoulder to get his attention. A few young guys stand there asking why he's hoarding all this delicious food for himself. They jeer that a scrawny guy like him shouldn't be eating so much, especially after making a fortune hunting monsters. One of them tells Turan he should share the wealth, but instantly gets hit back. Turan doesn't like jokes, and he definitely doesn't like strangers getting too comfortable with him. He tells them that if they wanted a handout, he just gave them a very generous one. The guy's friends yell that Turan shouldn't act tough just because he landed one lucky hit. They lung at him, saying they're going to teach him a lesson together. One of them grabs a chair to try and get the upper hand in the fight. Turan catches the chair midair and gets ready to flick the guy. He decides to use just a light flick, knowing it'll still send the guy flying. It's a tiny flick, but the impact is massive enough to knock the man flat on his back. Furious at the chaos, the blonde girl screams that she won't tolerate fighting in her tavern, especially since she's the one who has to pay for the broken furniture. Livid, she warns them that she won't say it twice. Seeing how incredibly angry she is, the troublemakers immediately apologize. A little later, the guys go to Turan's room to apologize to him directly. They promise it'll never happen again, confessing they only did it out of jealousy because they haven't made any money in months. The whole group bows and begs for forgiveness. They explain that things have been really rough for them lately. They haven't even been able to pay for their rooms at the inn for the past 3 days. Hearing their story, Turan decides to hand them some cash to help pay off their debt. He tells them he's doing this as a thank you for trying to recruit him to their party in the past, but he adds that he knows nothing in this world comes for free. Turan makes it clear that in exchange for the money, he wants information about the region. The leader agrees to the deal and starts sharing everything he knows about the area. With the info secured, Turan decides on his next destination, thinking this will be his last hunt in this town. Now that he has details about the next city, he decides it's time to move on. Turan thought Midam had given him some solid info and seemed like a pretty useful guy to know. He wasn't as experienced as Kjorn, but that actually made him a lot nicer. As he's thinking about this, Turan's eyes suddenly widen as he senses a presence nearby. His sharp sense of smell picks up a scent too, and with that, he figures out exactly which way he needs to go. Turan rushes toward the scent, hoping he's wrong, but the deep claw marks left on a tree are hard to ignore. He arrives too late and sees the aftermath from a distance. Turan spots a young man slumped against a tree and recognizes him as one of Midam's party members. The damage was already done. Looking around, he realizes it wasn't just this young man who met a grim fate. Turan sees that Midam, the group's leader, met a horrible end as well. Though he doesn't know exactly what happened, he figures it had to be the work of a powerful monster. He kneels down to get a closer look at his friend's body. Seeing the man covered in deep wounds, Turan asks what on earth happened here. He looks over as the young man tries to squeeze out a sentence. In a weak, barely audible voice, the kid mutters that it was a rabbit. Turan spots the beast chewing on something and wonders if that thing could really be a rabbit. The camera pans back to reveal the monster in full view. As it happily munches away, the rabbit hears the humans calling it a monster. To Turan, the creature is an absolute abomination, and the monster is already eyeing its next meal. Turan turns to get a better look at the beast. Right then, the rabbit suddenly lunges at him, hyper-aggressive. Things get incredibly tense in a split second. The rabbit lands, and Turan realizes that strike barely missed him. Turan prepares a counterattack to show the beast what he's made of. Locking in, he raises his other arm and starts swinging his weapon with real force. He unleashes the attack on the rabbit, ready to take down this massive beast. But the monster rabbit isn't backing down and readies a fierce strike of its own. Turan's attacks get closer and closer to landing on the rabbit, but the agile creature manages to block every single strike. Turan realizes this rabbit is already used to defending against ranged attacks. Annoyed, the beast leaps straight at Turan. The rabbit glares at him with pure hatred, its glowing red eyes wide open. The monster wants to overwhelm him so he can't escape, but it quickly realizes Turan is both strong and fast. The beast lands, completely baffled as to how its prey managed to dodge. Fully geared up, Turan leaps high into the air, ready to strike. Even though he's fighting a giant monster rabbit, Turan refuses to give it any opening to counterattack. After landing his blow, he quickly backs off to reassess the situation, but that attack only makes the rabbit crave his flesh even more. Even in pain, the monster lunges at Turan, but he suddenly vanishes. The rabbit bites right through a tree to clear its path and keep up the chase. After getting hit and losing sight of his target, the beast goes completely wild with rage. The non-stop violence of its attacks kicks up a massive cloud of dust. As the adrenaline starts to wear off, the pain from its wounds catches up to the rabbit, and it screeches. Turan's attack had gone way deeper than the monster realized. Shortly after, the fight ends with the beast defeated and collapsing to the ground. Looking down at the carcass, Turan wonders just how much mana he can extract from it. Since the spoils go to the victor, Turan reaches out his hands to absorb all of the creature's energy. As the mana flows into his body, he can feel his power surging. He realizes the amount of energy here is on a completely different level compared to what he got from the leopard. He watches the process, almost unable to believe what's happening. Right then, a young man approaches and asks Turan if he's a mage. The kid wants to know why he had been hiding his identity this whole time. He also asks if Turan has any family he wants his belongings sent to, just like the other injured people are doing. Among the group, one of them looks at Turan's face and thinks he looks familiar. A few hours earlier, this same young man had mentioned that the major neighboring city, Orem, was home to a massive library. They had talked about the massive collection of books stored there, which was the main reason the place was so famous. Turan was immediately interested the moment he heard about the size of the collection. However, the young man explained that access was restricted and only mages were allowed inside. That left Turan deep in thought, as that rule could really complicate his plans. Back in the present, Turan announces that he's heading out to the big city the young man mentioned. With a sad look on his face, the young man calls out the name of a friend who just passed away. As he walks away, he hopes his fallen companion finds peace wherever he is now. Later, somewhere else, Turan is waiting in a massive line to enter the city. He feels a little embarrassed that he was so impressed by the tiny village of Mure before. Standing right before him is the imposing city of Orem. He had no idea there would be so many people waiting to get through the gates. Turan notices how strict the guards are and wonders if they're looking for criminals. He figures a city this size definitely needs a solid security system. While he's lost in thought, a voice suddenly orders him to stop right there. A guard points at him and says he's not allowed in, leaving Turan totally confused. The guard explains that Turan's clothes are filthy and demands that he clean himself up before trying to enter. Turan completely ignores the guards complaining, as his attention is stolen by a gigantic tower dominating the skyline. Up close, the colossal structure showcases all the wealth and grandeur of the city. Turan realizes that must be the famous Library of Medan. The sheer scale of the building is mind-blowing, making him think it could only have been built using magic. As Turan approaches the entrance, one of the guards asks him what he wants. When Turan says he wants to go inside, the guard reminds him that entry is strictly for mages. Turan understands the rule and introduces himself as a mage, leaving the guard completely stunned. The guard rudely tells Turan not to play games with him. He puts his hand up, saying there's no way someone like Turan could be a mage. As the guard keeps his hand raised, a red energy starts radiating from him. Turan remembers hearing that mages can naturally sense each other's mana, instantly knowing who is stronger. Still, Turan doesn't look very comfortable with what's happening. The man makes a crazy face as he tries to gauge if Turan really is a mage. Though annoyed, Turan waits patiently, knowing it's just the guard's job to screen everyone. But after checking Turan's mana, the strain is so intense that the guard suddenly collapses, leaving his partner panicked. As he lies on the ground, the guard realizes Turan is no ordinary mage. He must be at least a high-ranking noble. Seeing this, the remaining guard quickly introduces himself as a member of House Kenya and asks Turan which family he belongs to. Turan asks if he really needs to give his family name just to enter, and the guard quickly says no. Terrified, the guard explains that entering the library requires permission from the Master of Valtas, so he'll have to go consult House Valtas first. Turan just sighs deeply, knowing this is going to take forever. He realizes that even a simple process like this could end up taking a whole decade to get sorted out. To make matters worse, now he has to deal with a maid. Things just keep going downhill, and now he has a maid trailing right behind him. Actually, he's surrounded by a whole group of maids, and he has absolutely no clue what to do with them. He tries his best to tolerate it, but finally loses his patience and asks them to leave. The problem is, the maids explain they'll be severely punished if he doesn't let them serve him. With no other choice, Turan gives up and tells them to do whatever they want. His patience seems to pay off, and one of the maids is left staring at him in awe. She covers her mouth and gasps, pointing out how different he looks. Noticing her stare, Turan asks if there's something on his face. Flustered, she apologizes and admits she was just captivated by how handsome he is. Thinking she's exaggerating, Turan tells them to cut the small talk and says they don't need to keep apologizing. Turan looks to the side, wondering what's going on now. Suddenly, a young girl appears, accompanied by her personal bodyguard. The red-haired girl also notices Turan's clean new look, remembering that he looked like a total beggar before. She comments that after a bath and some decent clothes, he actually looks like a prince. He introduces himself as Turan, and the girl replies that her name is Azella. Normally, they would introduce themselves by their family houses, but Turan prefers to keep his background a secret for now. Azella puts a hand to her chin and remarks that it's a real shame. She smiles, thinking to herself that she's going to have a little fun with him. Right then, a golden energy begins to radiate from her body. It seems like everyone in this place wants to test Turan's mana to see how much he can handle. Turan looks completely annoyed at having to deal with the exact same test all over again. Turan starts radiating a blue energy from his own body as he stares the girl down. Now, his blue light and her golden light clash head-on. The girl's bodyguard quickly steps in front of the maids to shield them from the pressure of the clashing energies. Turan just sighs once more, exhausted by having to deal with all this unnecessary drama. She gives a satisfied smile. Then, she just starts laughing at the whole situation. The redhead calls out to Turan. She walks up to him and straight up asks if he wants to marry her. Turan is completely blank, totally speechless. He wonders if she's actually serious about marrying him. Getting a bit embarrassed by his reaction, she asks why he's acting like that, saying she thought he was just surprised. She turns to leave, telling him the spot next to her is open, so he should think about it some more. Turan just watches her walk out of the room. The whole encounter leaves him deep in thought. He looks down, trying to make sense of everything that just happened. Turan notices his hand is actually shaking. He realizes her magic was at least on his level, and wonders if a human could even be capable of that. The scene cuts to an office. Turan is now standing in front of a seated man. The man welcomes him and asks if he already knows who he is. Turan introduces himself, and the man asks if he's here to use the library. The man mentions that a lot of people only come there looking for weird things. Turan says that's fine and he's not interested in that, so the man warns him there are no family secrets hidden in the library anyway. The man says it's late and tells Turan to get some rest so they can sort everything out tomorrow, and Turan thanks him for his hospitality. The next day, in front of the library, 2 guards bow and welcome him, confirming his access has been approved. Then, the heavy doors begin to open. Turan is blown away by the massive staircases and the sheer volume of books. He's so amazed he can barely get his words out. Suddenly, someone says it's their first time meeting him and addresses him as leader. A young girl introduces herself as the head librarian. She explains that per family orders, she's going to go over the basic rules of the library. Turan thinks it's weird that a kid is the librarian, while she explains that the first rule is you pay for any damage, and the second is no taking books out. She warns him she'll be watching him the whole time, and while Turan agrees, he asks if she can back up a bit while he reads because it's kind of awkward. Turan asks if she's read all the books here since she's the librarian, and she confirms, saying her job is to find whatever he needs. She asks what he's looking for, wondering if he wants a good story. She then teases him, asking if he wants something more adult since he's young. Turan responds that he just wants something to give him a basic understanding of the world. With that, she drops a heavy stack of books onto the table. She explains that most of the books are hundreds of years old and won't have what he's looking for, but says this specific one should help. Turan picks up the book, looking really interested. He thinks to himself that this book is exactly what he needed. He starts flipping through the pages. Turan takes a deep breath and tries to focus on his reading. He realizes this book is absolutely incredible. Turan settles into a daily routine, spending all his time reading in the library. He's starting to really understand the geography of this world. He finds it fascinating to learn about mage etiquette and how magical items are processed. He also reads up on monsters and relics from an ancient empire. As he absorbs all this knowledge, everything that used to be a mystery to him becomes clear and vivid. Back in the office, the noble asks Turan if he's making good use of the library. The man points out that even though he treats him like a noble, letting Turan use the library is a huge favor, and he expects that favor to be repaid. The man explains that a beast recently showed up north of Orel, and the 4 knights sent to deal with it never returned. He thinks a mage needs to step in, but he only has 2 available. If Turan joins them, they'll have 3, making the mission a lot safer. Turan says he understands, thinking to himself that protecting people is a mage's duty anyway. Still, he finds the situation a bit weird since mages don't usually get involved in stuff like this. The man explains that the pass they came through is Oral's only trade route, and it's been blocked for 10 days now. Turan figures he should just head out, take care of it, and then come back to finish his reading. A few hours later, they set off on their journey. Several knights are seen walking alongside Turan and the young red-haired girl. Throwing her hands up, the girl complains that her father is unbelievable. She says she can't believe he'd drag a guest into a magic beast hunt, and questions if their own knights are really that unreliable. She waves it off, saying it's fine since they're guests anyway, and that her dad is just being overly dramatic. The young man next to her speaks up, saying the master of the house isn't being dramatic at all, and that she's exaggerating. The girl glares at him, giving him a look that clearly says, "Shut up." The young man turns to Turan, asks if this is his first time on a mission like this, and introduces himself as Marvin Baltus. The girl kicks a rock, looking lost in thought. While kicking the rock, she grumbles that she wants to get this over with so she can go back home and rest. Marvin asks Turan if he happens to be interested in his sister, and Turan tells him no. Closing his eyes, the guy says that's very good to hear. Suddenly, the group stops when they hear an order to halt. Right ahead, the wreckage of a carriage is scattered across the ground. Two knights inspect the wreckage, and one points out that the pieces are scattered along the northern road, meaning the carriage was likely attacked on its way down. Putting his hand to his chin, Turan thinks the whole setup is incredibly strange. There's even a distinct handprint left on the wreckage. One of the knights spots the print and points it out to the others. The girl doesn't quite get what happened, so Turan points directly to the handprint. Turan says it looks like the attackers ambushed the merchants and then retreated into the forest, so they should track their trail. The girl, who can barely use the magic she was born with, says she forgot how to do that anyway and asks Marvin if the plan is bad. Turan tells them he's going to go check out the tracks. The girl asks if he used to be a scout, but Turan just says he's used to tracking things. With that, he sniffs a piece of cloth from the carriage. His eyes widen as he senses something highly unusual. Turan can actually see the trail of the scent drifting through the air. Turan points ahead, letting them know the trail goes this way. They reach a river, and Turan mentions the trail ends there because it looks like their target took a bath. The lady asks if a beast would actually wash itself on purpose to cover its tracks. Turan replies that it probably just wanted to wash off. Suddenly, his eyes widen as the scent gets way stronger. Turan whips around and warns everyone that the monster is right behind them. Right on cue, a massive monster appears right in front of them. The massive creature instantly grabs everyone's attention. The knights turn around, staring up at the massive threat. While they watch, the monster grabs a pile of rocks to hurl at them. One of the knights yells for everyone to watch out. The monster hurls the rocks, and several knights get blasted by the impact. Turan reacts instantly, leaping backward to dodge the attack. He looks around to see how the other knights are doing. Not everyone managed to escape unscathed. The redhead actually uses one of the knights' bodies as a shield to protect herself, and after using her ally, she just tosses the man to the ground. Turan thinks to himself that his mother's warnings about people were absolutely right. The lady orders the remaining knights to charge the monster immediately. The warriors follow her orders and charge right at the creature. She tells them to go after it, but one of the knights warns that the monster moves way too fast. Meanwhile, Turan lines up his shot at the target. The leader of the group yells at everyone to move faster. Suddenly, a projectile whizzes right past the lady's face. She stops dead in her tracks, realizing an attack was just fired from behind her. All the knights freeze in their tracks as a beam of blue light cuts through the air right between them. The blast is fired with so much force that it tears right through the rocks, hitting the monster dead on. Shocked, the knights and the lady look back to see who could have pulled off such an incredible shot, and that's when they see it was Turan who fired the shot. Turan looks up, clearly not happy about the situation. The group notices that Turan's attack completely took the creature down. Giving the monster no time to recover, Azella gets ready for the final blow. She starts summoning intense flames that swirl around her arm. Then, she unleashes a massive fire serpent straight at the downed monster. The impact triggers a massive explosion, drawing everyone's eyes. Turan is shocked to witness the sheer destructive power of the Valtus family's pyromaniac bloodline. The knights sigh in relief, glad the fight is finally over. Azella mentions she actually got chills when that first shot buzzed past her. Marvin teases her, asking if she was actually scared of Turan's attack. While they chat, the surviving knights tend to the wounded, helping each other up. Turan looks at the injured knights and thinks about how chaotic the situation is, but he's relieved that no one died. He reflects that even with the surprise attack, they could have avoided such serious injuries in that fight. Turan knows that these warriors' bodies get stronger when they use magic. Since they're much tougher than average knights, they should have handled things differently instead of using the weaker ones as shields. Marvin notices he's being watched and asks Turan why he's staring at him like that. Turan quickly replies that it's nothing. Azella tells them to focus on what actually matters and calls Turan over to absorb the monster's mana. Right after, the three of them stand before the defeated creature. Turan wastes no time and begins absorbing the mana. He recalls what he read in his books. confirming that even when multiple people absorb mana at the same time, the power boost they get doesn't decrease. Meanwhile, Azella and Marvin stop absorbing and complain that they've already hit their growth limit. Azella watches Turan and comments that she finally understands why he came along, since his mastery matches her own. They even feel a bit intimidated thinking about how Turan is a noble who hasn't even hit his growth limit yet. Once the three of them finish absorbing the mana, everyone heads back to House Valtus. On the way, Marvin praises Turan, saying they wouldn't have even found the monster without his help. Turan says it's no big deal and regrets not figuring out how the creature worked sooner. He's talking about the monster's detection skills, leaving Marvin confused by the comment. Turan explains that the skills awakened by monsters vary depending on their physical traits. He explains that the ape they defeated had massive eyes and hands, meaning it could see from far away and throw things. Marvin asks how he figured that out so fast, and Turan replies that he read about it in a bestiary at the library. The two of them comment that the library is outdated and that they've only been there once because the books were way too difficult. Turan suggests that next time they can just ask the librarian to recommend some easier books. Azella looks confused and asks who this librarian is. She claims that as far as she knows, nobody actually works in that library. After returning from the mission, Turan goes straight to the library entrance. As soon as he walks in, he gets a cheerful welcome from the librarian. Turan thinks to himself that he was being careless, since no regular citizen in town would call a noble by his name so easily. Besides, he finds it weird that anyone would even work as a librarian in such an abandoned place. Cutting straight to the point, he asks her how she knows his name. The girl is caught off guard by his sudden question. She quickly recovers and asks if he's only realizing this now. Turan admits he is, and she explains that she found out his name by looking at his license. She adds that nothing around the library escapes her notice. Turan then asks what he should call her from now on. The girl replies that she doesn't have a name and says he can call her whatever he wants. She jokingly suggests calling her sweetheart, but Turan immediately shuts her down and decides to just call her librarian. She finds his sudden politeness weird, pointing out that he spent the last few days ordering her around to do all sorts of things. Turan denies acting that way and asks her to step back a bit, since her being so close makes him uncomfortable. As she floats in the air, she explains that she isn't human, but rather something like a spirit. She explains that when a soul inhabits a living body, it becomes a living spirit. When it inhabits something dead, it becomes a dead spirit. But if it inhabits something that is neither alive nor dead, it simply becomes a spirit. She explains that she's actually the library itself, and that she only took this physical form based on Turan's personal taste to make chatting easier. Right before teasing him about his preferences, Turan thinks she's lying, but she assures him she only speaks the truth, acting like a reflection in the water. Still skeptical, Turan decides to study the librarian very closely. He reaches out to touch her, but his hand passes right through as if she's completely intangible. She gets annoyed and tells him to cut it out, complaining that he's being super creepy. The librarian then mentions how incredibly frustrating it is that she can't use force against intruders. She says if she had her way, she'd severely punish anyone who doesn't treat the books with proper care. Turan asks why none of the other visitors seem to know she exists. She explains that, until now, no one had met the requirements to actually see her. Her creator designed her so only people of a certain caliber could see her, and Turan is the only one here who fits the bill. Turan asks what she means by caliber, wondering if it has to do with the bloodlines mages always talk about. When he asks what his own bloodline might be, she tells him to ask his parents, forcing Turan to admit he's an orphan. Licking her lips, the librarian offers to find out for him, explaining she just needs to examine his body. Turan gets confused and embarrassed by the offer, and she asks to double-check if that really is his actual body. Laughing at the absurd situation, he tells her that yes, it is. Suddenly and without warning, the librarian shoves her hand right into Turan's chest, leaving him absolutely terrified. She tells him they're now connected, while Turan is surprised to realize it didn't hurt at all. She reveals that his primary bloodline is that of a stalker and hunter, pointing out these traits belong to the Zahar family. But right after, she's shocked to discover there's a second bloodline inside him. This other bloodline is mixed in, meaning he's the child of two people from completely different lineages. Curious, Turan asks what the second bloodline is, but she admits she doesn't know because that part is sealed. She reassures him that having a sealed bloodline is common when you inherit two, and guarantees the seal will break on its own once he gets stronger. Hearing this, Turan looks down, lost in thought. He remembers his mother and realizes she must have been a descendant of some noble house. Even with diluted blood, she was far too educated to be a commoner. Turan thanks the librarian for her help, and in return, she asks him to stay there for 1 more month. Now knowing the spirit's true identity, Turan begins studying with her and asking her to explain different subjects. She turns out to be incredibly wise, even knowing the contents of books that were looted and lost millions of years ago. Learning the laws of nature directly from her feels like discovering a literal treasure trove. He learns that diseases are caused by microorganisms, and that things decompose because of them too. Turan also learns about the refraction of light, friction generating heat, and how wounds heal. Armed with all this new knowledge, he decides to do a practical test, starting with decomposition. The moment he touches an apple, it instantly shrivels up. The results are amazing. While he could do this before using pure magic, this scientific approach uses way less mana. Just by changing how he views the world, Turan's magic gets a massive upgrade. He realizes some families probably hide this knowledge on purpose so they don't lose their monopoly on power. The librarian agrees, saying it explains why humanity's overall level of knowledge has dropped so much over time. Eventually, Turan tells her it's time for him to leave. He explains that the library's owner is starting to get annoyed by his constant presence. Sad to see him go, the spirit begs Turan to take her with him. Turan dodges her as she clings to him, asking if she can even leave the library grounds. Since she can't leave, she tells him he should just stay, promising she'll take great care of him. But when he turns her down, she flies off, acting like she doesn't care anyway. She mentions there are plenty of divine legacies scattered across the continent, suggesting he look for them since there might be a spirit out there wiser than her. As she leaves, she says she'll still come back to visit sometime. Pouting, she mutters that if he doesn't want to go with her, then whatever. But Turan just smiles and says he still has plenty of books left to read here. Later, walking outside, Turan thinks back to the map he found in the library. According to it, the Zahar family base is located east of Orem, and right then, he makes his decision. He's going to Zahar to look for clues about his parents. Turan doesn't feel that rush of urgency anymore, so he takes his time as he heads into the forest. He even stops to rest, cook some food, and recharge his batteries. He figures that if the clues were going to vanish, they would have disappeared during the 18 years he wasn't looking for them. Plus, if there's still anything left to find, it's not going to disappear just because he's a little late. But suddenly, something catches Turan's attention up ahead. It sounds like a horse neighing. Peering from behind a bush, he watches as a wild beast charges forward. It looks like the beast threw its rider, though it's still wearing a saddle, and it seems a group of thugs is trying to attack the poor animal. Even from a distance, you can tell how pissed off these guys are at the beast. Then, Turan notices something else that really grabs his attention. Those are dark elves, beings that use magic to manipulate minds. They aren't holding back either, as they all seem to be deep in some kind of ritual. Judging by the massive amount of mana they're channeling, it's definitely some form of dark elf necromancy. Turan recalls reading about this in a book, and he knows dark elf necromancy is extremely dangerous. Looking at the scene, he hesitates, wondering if he should even get involved. He thinks that maybe the guy lying on the ground brought this on himself by messing with the dark elves. But Turan's eyes go wide when he sees how these elves actually feed. He watches as one of them takes a massive bite out of a human arm. Another elf asks whose arm that is, saying he really wants a taste to see if it's any good. Realizing these creatures are cannibals, Turan's blood boils. Now he has no choice but to step in and put a stop to this. After using his stealth skill to watch the elves finish eating, he decides to make his move. Turan's attack is so devastating that the elves, totally focused on their food, don't even see it coming. The elf who wanted a bite of the arm is left completely confused as to why his buddy just suddenly vanished. In an instant, his appetite disappears, because all that's left of his partner is a massive puddle of blood on the ground. Though terrified, the elf thinks it serves him right for not sharing the arm. Right now, his only goal is to buy enough time to run away. But Turan isn't about to give him that chance, immediately firing a barrage of razor-sharp stone shards at him. In the middle of the chaos, even their horned goat monster gets caught in the crossfire. The elf can't comprehend why his own beasts are abandoning him instead of staying to protect him. All the demonic beasts seem completely out of control. The rain of rocks is so intense that there's absolutely no way to dodge. No matter which way they try to move, the enemies just keep getting pelted. The evil elf figures this must be some kind of stealth magic. He wants to see if the intruder can still stay hidden after taking a little damage. So the elf decides to use his most powerful and wicked spell just to force the enemy out into the open. The problem is Turan is actually enjoying being camouflaged in the shadows. But the horned, meat-eating elf isn't about to make things that easy for him. It doesn't take long for Turan to have to show his face because the elf's spell is just too strong. Now that he's pinpointed the intruder, the elf sends his beast after him. But Turan has no patience for playing tag. He charges up energy in his hands to unleash his flames. The hotter the fire, the better the results. The first to get wrecked is the beast that tries to charge straight at Turan. The display of power is so massive that it sends the enemies flying. Still, Turan realizes they are incredibly fast. At least he managed to take one of them out earlier, so the situation seems a bit more manageable now. But just as he thinks that, Turan feels a sharp bite from a beast trying to make him its next meal. And getting bit on the leg by this wild beast instantly puts Turan in a terrible mood. He gets so angry that he forcefully shoves the creature away, but as soon as he turns around, he's face to face with a wild buffalo. The beast is incredibly fierce and slams Turan hard against a tree. After taking the horn strike and crashing into the trunk, Turan curls up in pain and starts coughing. Things are looking pretty bad and he's clearly outnumbered. The surviving elf is thrilled, since that damn human had the nerve to take out his partner, but the elf's joy is cut short when a horse's hoof strikes him right in the face. The horse doesn't stop at just one hit, keeping up the stomps to make sure the attack really lands. While the elf gets trampled and screams at the other beasts for help, the buffalo and the fox just stand there watching. Right after, the other beasts jump into the fray and start biting the horse. As soon as he manages to free himself from the horse, the elf swears that everyone is going to pay for this humiliation. Suddenly, Something flashes by so fast that the elf doesn't even see it coming. The elf is hit with pinpoint precision. He stands absolutely zero chance of escaping once he runs right into Turin in the middle of the woods. The horse does its part too, kicking away all the beasts trying to bite it. Turin is glad the horse can defend itself, but the poor animal can barely stand from all the pain. Turin tries his best to push through the exhaustion and his own injuries. The pain in his body is so unbearable that, for a second, he thinks he might not make it. But it looks like the four-legged animal has something to offer the human who helped it. That's why the horse does everything it can to get Turin's attention. Turin realizes the horse wants to thank him for saving both its life and its master's. After a long time, the horse's owner finally starts to wake up. He looks around, completely confused by his surroundings, since he doesn't recognize where he is. He panics a bit when he sees the campfire, which makes sense considering he was just traumatized by cannibals, but he calms down quickly once he realizes it's just Turan sitting quietly in front of him. Seeing that he's awake, Turan asks if he's feeling any better. Still a bit dazed, the man asks who Turan is. To keep it short, Turan explains that he saw him being attacked by dark elves and decided to step in and help. The horse nods its head, almost as if it's confirming every word Turan says. Turan is impressed by how smart the animal is, noting how it seems to understand everything and is incredibly protective of its master. The blonde man thanks Turan for saving his life and introduces himself, mentioning which noble family he belongs to. Turan wants to know more about the dark elves, so he asks if there are any others nearby. The man explains that he was traveling with his servants when they were suddenly ambushed, leaving them with absolutely no way to defend themselves. He mentions that he'd heard stories about rare, savage races before, but he never imagined they would be this dangerous. Looking at his horse, he starts to tear up, remembering how the poor animal was almost eaten alive. He apologizes for crying, explaining that the people he lost in the attack were very important to him. Turan asks if the people who died were his family members. As they talk, Turan realizes that this man is genuinely a good person. Turan tells him that he fought 2 elves and took them both out, so he doubts there are any left in the forest. Even so, Turan wants to make absolutely sure, so he uses his scouting skill. This power allows him to see over incredibly long distances. After thoroughly scanning the entire area, he confirms that there are indeed no other dark elves around. The man then asks Turan if he has any urgent plans at the moment. When he hears that Turan is just traveling, the blonde man asks if he's the son of some great noble family. Turan tries to downplay it, explaining that he isn't actually as strong as he looks. He explains that he took the first elf by surprise and had a really hard time defeating the second one. Turan makes it clear that he only managed to win that fight thanks to the red horse's help. The two of them continue chatting casually as equals. Still, Turan thinks to himself that he would have been even weaker if he hadn't absorbed the mana from those dark elves. Meanwhile, the man watches Turan, wondering if he really has the raw level to face 2 necromancers on his own. He figures the young man must have an incredible fighting style or comes from a very special bloodline. He also can't understand why someone so talented would be traveling completely alone. So, he suggests that if Turan doesn't have a specific destination in mind, he should join his family. Looking at Turan, the man plans to make him a custom magic artifact as a thank you gift. They decide the best thing to do next is bury the bodies of the people who died fighting the necromancers. Once the job is done, the blonde man looks incredibly sad and mentions that he wishes he could send the bodies back to their families. After that, he turns to Turan and thanks him once again for all his help and support. The noble remarks that seeing a man of his standing crying over his subordinates must look pretty pathetic, but he believes that those who die in an honorable battle go to a heavenly palace to live among the gods. He adds that if being strong means not grieving the loss of his people, then he'd rather never be strong. Turan replies that he doesn't see that as weakness at all, but rather as true kindness. The knight says that since they've already decided to travel together, they can talk more casually. Super excited, he says he's looking forward to working with Turan from now on. For someone who lived as a mountain shepherd and only ever got ingratitude from the locals, having someone want to be his friend right off the bat was pretty surprising. Still, making a new friend is always a good thing. After all that trouble, the man suggests taking a break to rest. Turan is curious to know what's inside that box he's carrying. To satisfy his curiosity, the knight explains it's a cooler box and opens it to show all kinds of fresh food. He says he stocked up on plenty of food in the last town he passed through. The man proudly brags about his magic items, explaining that pressing a button on one pours water, while another turns into a shelter if you gather some wood around it. Then he shows off a third item that sounds an alarm whenever someone gets close. Even the clothes he's wearing are magical and clean themselves. Turan had no idea magic items could be used for such ordinary, everyday things. Looking closely at his companion's clothes, Turan says that just getting those would be plenty of payment for saving his life. But the man says that's way too little, and promises to give him something much better once they get to his house. He promises that even if the elders say no, he'll find a way to make it happen. His companion then asks if this is really Turan's first time traveling, saying he lost count of how many types of magic he saw him use along the way. He lists them off, animal taming, freezing, levitation, liquid control, physical enhancement, light magic, terrain restriction, and even summoning lightning. For Turan, using all of that was as natural as breathing. A bit embarrassed, Turan reminds him they already agreed he wouldn't pry into his lineage. His friend laughs it off as a joke and asks how old he actually is. He's completely shocked when Turan tells him he's only a month away from his 19th birthday. The man, who was just bragging a second ago, says that's impossible because he's 43 himself, though he quickly shrugs it off, saying a 24-year age gap doesn't really matter anyway. Then he mentions he should have realized it sooner, knowing Turan defeated 2 necromancers with that level of magic power. He says he now realizes there must be 2 geniuses in the world, and while the other one isn't quite on Turan's level, they're pretty similar. He reveals this genius is his second cousin, and Turan gets interested, asking if she can make a magic item for him. But the man explains that might not be possible, since she isn't from a branch family but from the main line. He reveals that she is the Princess of Arabian and might even become the head of the great family in the future. As they keep walking, he explains that unlike ordinary mage families, the leader of a major lineage has to be extremely powerful. Because of that, passing the leadership position down to your own biological child is no easy task. With dozens of relatives from the same generation, someone stronger than the patriarch's child always ends up emerging. Even so, among the patriarch's children, Mesa was born, and her talent surpasses everyone else's. He says that just 10 years after awakening her powers, she already mastered the Arabian lineage magic and every form of combat magic. Turan asks if having that much magic power is normal for her age, or if her family gave her some kind of special support. The blonde man nods and explains she even inherited their great-uncle's magic power when he passed away, though everyone in the family received a small portion of it. Turan realizes that this is exactly why the great families manage to stay on top. He keeps listening to his friend, who says it looks like they're finally reaching their destination. Turan looks at the area, seemingly amazed by the view. They continue walking in silence. In front of them, a massive, vast landscape opens up, the Deccan Plains. This is the heart of Arabian territory, the lands of the Burke family, known as Zabalin. Aziz is finally back home, and his mother welcomes him with open arms. After everything he's been through, he finally gets a warm, comforting hug from his mom. Turan can't help but stare blankly, watching a 43-year-old man completely break down in his mother's lap. A stern-looking man steps up, telling Aziz to keep his dignity and address the woman formally as my lady. Aziz decides to introduce his friend, explaining that they met down south. He explains that Turan is the savior who risked his own life to save him. His mother comments that a pilgrimage route really shouldn't be that dangerous. She demands to know exactly what happened and gets absolutely furious when he mentions they were attacked by dark elf necromancers. The stern man asks her to calm down again, pointing out that people nearby might be watching them. He then asks which noble family Aziz's savior belongs to. His eyes widen as soon as Turan admits that's a tough question to answer. Turan is completely honest, saying the truth is he doesn't really know. He explains that his mother was a commoner and he has no idea who his father is. Hearing this, Aziz completely freezes. He had no clue. The mother acknowledges that Turan isn't from a famous bloodline, but she still thanks him for saving her most precious treasure. She explains that it would be difficult to host him inside the family mansion, so she'll arrange for him to stay at the best inn in town instead. Aziz tries to protest, but his mother cuts him off, saying that while it would normally be fine, they currently have an extremely important guest staying with them. Suddenly, a red-haired woman walks in and says that if she's the reason, then they don't need to worry. She points out that she highly doubts someone who went out of their way to save Aziz would suddenly try to take her life. Everyone turns to look at her as she seemingly appears out of nowhere, almost like she stepped right out of the shadows. The light-eyed, red-haired woman looks a bit downcast and drained. Aziz is glad his cousin is being so understanding, but he's confused as to why she's even here in the first place. Watching from a distance, Turan quickly realizes that this woman is actually the Princess of Arabian. He also notices she looks more like a walking corpse than royalty. He overhears her mention that she was recently almost killed by those worms of Zahar. Aziz is deeply concerned that someone would try to attack the main house again, especially considering how tight their security systems are. She says there's likely a traitor inside their own home since plenty of people in the family can't stand her. Looking at everyone, she explains she's exhausted and wants to turn in for the night, wishing them all a good evening. With that, Aziz's mother orders her staff to prepare their second-best guest room for her son's savior. Night quickly falls over the estate. Even though the bed is incredibly comfortable and the room is pure luxury, Turan just can't seem to fall asleep. Everywhere he looks, there's nothing but wealth, elegance, and power, but none of it helps him drift off. He ends up staring at the light from a few lamps overhead, which look like strange magical contraptions. Unable to sleep, he decides to get out of bed and explore the house. Suddenly, someone calls out his name, and he looks over to see who it is. It's Aziz, who asks if he always wakes up this early, wondering what he's doing wandering the hallway all by himself. Turan points to the device on the wall, explaining that it caught his eye. Aziz laughs it off, saying it's the simplest thing in the world, just a basic magic lamp that anyone training in magic learns to make. But suddenly, a bright flash of light from outside catches their attention. Despite the sudden flash, Turan stays completely calm and keeps his guard up. Aziz explains that his cousin must be training, mentioning she's always been incredibly dedicated. Turan asks if that's her lineage magic, and Aziz nods, confirming it's the storm lineage. Aziz says he's never hated his own bloodline, but seeing this actually makes him a bit jealous, since his cousin looks like a literal god right now. Turan gets curious about just how strong the next heir of the Arabian family really is. Aziz looks over at Turan and asks if he wants to see her power up close. He adds that he's really curious to see how Turan's strength compares to his cousin's. Aziz admits he sparred with Mesa a few years ago, and he's still bitter about how that went down. So, the two of them head over to the training grounds to see just how terrifying she can be. As soon as they call out to her, Mesa turns around with a look of pure annoyance. Not at all bothered by the interruption, she demands to know who the guy her cousin brought along is. Aziz introduces him as Turan, immediately realizing she already suspects why they're dropping by. He explains they just want to watch her practice her magic, and maybe join in for a bit. Mesa brings up how it took Aziz a whole week to pull off a spell she mastered in just 2 tries. She says she still remembers the outcome of that old match perfectly. Hearing that his friend ran off crying from that training session, Turan can't help but laugh. Aziz defends himself, saying things are different now because Turan is one of the most talented mages he's ever seen. Then, he suggests the two of them have a little sparring match to spice things up. Mesa thinks it's ridiculous for her cousin to even suggest she fight this guy. Turan just watches her quietly, showing no sign of arrogance. She glares at Turan, clearly wanting to show him how insignificant he is compared to her. Turan doesn't react, and simply looks up at the sky. He sees the sky completely lit up by the energy radiating from Mesa. Before long, that massive power starts overflowing from her body. It's obvious she's furious about being interrupted during her practice. To teach them a lesson, Mesa blasts a massive jolt of electricity straight at Turan. Turan takes the hit directly, even though it hurts like crazy. After a moment, the attack stops, and the sky begins to clear up again. Turan is shaking badly, but he stays on his feet and actually finds the whole experience pretty interesting. Even though he's drenched in sweat, he manages to withstand the full impact of the blast. As he tries to catch his breath, Turan notices Mesa staring at him with a strange look. She scoffs, saying it's a joke to even call a fight between them a real match. Turan is annoyed to hear Mesa claim he isn't even on her level. Aziz steps in, explaining that while Turan has less raw mana, his ability to copy and learn new spells on the fly is terrifying. He insists that Turan is a magic genius, and that even Mesa wouldn't be able to keep up with him. Hearing all this praise directed at Turan, she decides to accept the challenge once and for all. Turan proposes a challenge. They'll each show a spell the other doesn't know, and whoever copies their opponent's spell faster wins. Aziz loves the idea, and asks his cousin if she agrees to the terms. Mesa accepts, but demands they exclude bloodline magic. Realizing Turan doesn't even know his own origins, she warns him that she's going first, starting right now. The two of them get ready to watch what she's about to do. Suddenly, plant sprouts begin to break through and grow from the ground. The sprouts quickly multiply, rapidly growing into massive vines. The plants wrap around Aziz and lift him off the ground. As he squirms in the air, Mesa explains that this is plant manipulation magic, and asks if Turan can do the same. Up in the air, Aziz yells at her to let him down, but Mesa says he should stay up there a bit longer because it's fun. Turan analyzes the spell to figure out how it works. He kneels down, touches the ground, and tries to replicate it. Turan reasons that fire magic just needs to manifest heat, while water magic pulls moisture from the air. He figures these vines work the same way. He just needs to make the seeds in the soil grow instantly. He commands them to grow, and suddenly the seeds start to sprout. Vines shoot out of the ground and wrap around his arm. This takes Mesa completely by surprise. Aziz is also shocked, even though he half expected something like this. Since he used the command grow, Mesa asks Turan if he's seen this magic somewhere before, but he says it's his first time. Once he's back on the ground, Aziz comments that, for once, Turan didn't just babble nonsense. Then Mesa says it's Turan's turn to propose a challenge. Turan realizes that using a spell from the Zahar lineage would be suicide. But then, he remembers another spell he can cast. He points his hand toward a nearby bush. A rat runs out of the bush and scurries right over to Turan. Disappointed, Mesa asks if the challenge is just animal taming. Turan explains that the rat is just the catalyst for the spell. He feels the magic flowing through his body and starts to concentrate. He directs his mana straight into the rat. A split second later, the rat simply rots away. The sight leaves Mesa completely stunned. Holding the dead rat, Turan announces that his demonstration is complete. Mesa agrees and says it's now her turn to try. With a gesture of her hand, she calls out. Another rat appears and walks up to her. She picks up the animal, closes her eyes, and begins to channel her mana. Her mana flows into the rat, but absolutely nothing happens to it. Mesa channels even more mana, wondering how Turan pulled this off, since it doesn't seem like standard magic. Aziz asks why he had to use such a gross spell, and Turan replies it was just the first thing that came to mind. Turan thinks to himself that his suspicions were right. He wonders if even the prestigious Arabian family is completely clueless about this spell. Seeing Mesa struggle, Aziz asks if they can just hand the victory to Turan already. Annoyed, she tells him to shut up and insists she's going to pull it off. In magic, causality is incredibly complex because so many factors are at play. It depends on whether the user understands the phenomenon they want to cause, if it's natural, and how much mana is used. Knowing how the phenomenon actually works drastically boosts the success rate and lowers mana consumption. Because of this, one way to force a spell to work when you lack knowledge is to brute force it with a massive amount of mana. Channeling as much mana as she can possibly muster, Mesa focuses entirely on making the rat rot. Slowly, the magic starts to take effect, and the rat's flesh finally begins to rot. This surprises both of them, because they didn't think she could actually pull it off. Even though she's exhausted, she boasts about her success, but she can't hold on any longer and her eyes start to close. Then, she collapses onto the floor. Aziz rushes over and begs her to open her eyes. He tries to figure out what's wrong, since running out of mana doesn't usually make someone pass out. At most, she should just be extremely exhausted. But as he takes a closer look, he notices something. He looks at Mesa's hands and realizes what happened. He picks her up and asks if there's a healing mage nearby, but when he's told there isn't one, he orders them to bring salt and water to her room. As he carries her, he realizes she's been using her mana just to keep her own body functioning. She shouldn't even have been able to stand. A while later, Mesa finally opens her eyes. Her aunt looks incredibly worried and asks if she's okay. With a lot of effort, she sits up in bed and asks how she got there, and her aunt explains that Aziz said she fainted while training with their guest. But her aunt isn't sure if that's the truth, so she asks her if that's really what happened. Still worried, her aunt asks if that man did anything to hurt her, but Mesa quickly tells her it wasn't Turan's fault and asks everyone to leave because her head is pounding. Before leaving, her aunt mentions she made some soup and asks her to at least try to eat, even if her magic is making it hard. Getting no response, her aunt sighs and stands up. Just as her aunt is about to walk out, Mesa thanks her. She sits there with her head down, her mind racing with thoughts, but then she looks over and sees the food her aunt made, so she decides to give it a try and eat. But the moment she tastes the soup, she is absolutely terrified by what she sees. She gets visions of the dead, including her servants and even her sister. Unable to take it, she drops the bowl of soup onto the floor. After that, she curls up, trembling in pain and sheer terror. Meanwhile, deep in the basement of the Beck family estate, inside the temple of the lame goddess, Haram, a guard for the Beck family, tells Turan there are no gaps in the walls or the doors here, so he warns him to forget about trying to break anything and escape. Still perfectly calm, Turan replies that he understands completely. The guard steps closer and says the walls are incredibly solid. He gets even closer and repeats that they are extremely solid. Turan wonders if the guy is just bragging, but suddenly, he notices something strange. He hears the swing of a sword. Turns out, the guard decided not to waste any time and started practicing his swordsmanship while on watch. Confused, Turan asks the man what he's doing. The guard says he's just practicing and transitions into another stance. He follows through with a clean, lightning-fast thrust. After that, he lets out a vertical slash that actually creates a small gust of wind. Watching this, Turan notes that there isn't a single wasted movement. Each strike perfectly sets up the next. Suddenly, the guard turns and notices Turan staring at him. Turan quickly apologizes for interrupting his practice. The guard walks over and asks him what he thought of his form. Turan admits that he found his swordsmanship absolutely incredible. The guard takes a step back and nods, saying he understands. He mentions that while nobles look down on martial arts as useless, it's only because they never manage to master them. Turan points out that unless a family line focuses purely on physical combat, focusing on magic is usually way more efficient. But when you're pushed to your limits, situations will always come up where magic isn't enough. Haram holds out his sword and tells Turan to take it. Turan hesitates, asking if it's really a good idea to hand a weapon to a suspect who is currently locked up. Offering the sword again, Haram says it's just a piece of metal, adding that in Turan's current physical state, he couldn't beat him anyway. Turan takes the sword, wondering what exactly he's supposed to do with it. Haram watches with genuine interest to see what the young man will do. Using a tiny bit of mana, Turan tries to copy the guard's stance. Haram points out that he's doing it all wrong. Turan grips the sword, letting his mystical energy wrap around his entire body. Haram explains that this specific exercise doesn't require any mana at all. He instructs him to shift more weight onto his supporting leg, as if his feet are rooted deep into the ground. Haram also tells him to raise his arm higher, warning him not to limit his own range of motion. He suggests that if Turan has the time, he should focus on pushing his body to its absolute physical limits. The guard claims that magic is nothing but a crutch, saying mages mistakenly believe it can replace physical strength. He declares that a well-conditioned body can dominate any battlefield without needing any magical help at all. Suddenly, Turan hears a noise and looks over to see what's going on. Just then, a young woman enters the room. The leader calls her out, saying it's highly disrespectful to behave like that toward their benefactor. Turan steps in, saying he's glad to see she's recovered, and apologizes, feeling like his own behavior as a guest was out of line. The young woman says Mesa wants to apologize to Turan and asks if he has a moment. In another room, Mesa explains she heard he was kept locked up in the temple because of her, and sincerely apologizes for the trouble. Turan replies that it was a necessary precaution, and says her safety is the only thing that matters. She mentions that the spell he used yesterday to decompose the beasts used an incantation in a completely unknown language. Turan tells her that if she understands the basic principles behind it, she'll be able to use that magic too. She argues that without proper instruction, there's no way to prove it isn't actually language-based magic. She worries that if things end like this, her reputation will be ruined. So she proposes a deal. If he reveals the secret behind that spell, she'll teach him a secret technique from Arabian. With that agreed, Turan begins to teach her the actual technique. Holding the creature, Mesa asks if the spell is based on biological enhancement by controlling invisible microorganisms. She points out that just as she suspected, the spell is incredibly inefficient and wastes a ton of energy, meaning it only worked through sheer brute force. Mesa says she expected as much when they made the bet, since the magic aptitude test doesn't actually measure total mana capacity. She suggests calling it a draw to save Aziz's pride, mostly because she doesn't want to deal with his arrogant attitude. Because of that, she says she needs to pay up what they agreed on. She grabs a comb and says it's the perfect tool to show him what she means. As the boy watches, Mesa starts combing her hair. Holding the comb close to her head, she demonstrates how friction between two objects creates an attraction, explaining the science behind it. The boy finishes her explanation, calling the phenomenon static electricity. Surprised, she asks if he already knows about it, and he nods yes. Mesa realizes she'll have to find a better alternative, since she wanted to teach him something completely new. She turns to him and suggests they train together until she can think of a fair reward. He smiles and agrees, suggesting they meet every day in the late afternoon, outside. Later that evening, the dinner table is packed with delicious food. They tell everyone to dig in and eat as much as they want. The young heir is surprised by the massive feast, and mentions they don't even have this much variety on his birthday. Someone comments that it's a bit of a weird comparison to make right now. The older lady then asks him to pick up where they left off in their previous conversation. The boy confirms the details, and the young woman asks if there's a specific item he wants. He explains he's looking for some personal protection, preferably something to help against sneak attacks. She replies that it's a common request and easy enough to do, but mentions she doesn't have anything ready to go right now. The young clan member raises his hand and offers to make the item himself, explaining he just finished an order for the main family and has some free time. The lady asks about his design plan, and he suggests that a constant wear accessory would be the best defense against ambushes. He proposes making a ring, earring, or necklace that can instantly trigger a protective magic barrier. While it might sound like family pride speaking, the item really is going to be crafted by an incredibly skilled conjurer. The boy thanks them, but wonders if they're being a bit too generous. The matriarch assures him that during his 30-day stay, he will be treated as an honored guest, so he should just accept it. In another room, the heir mentions he thinks his mother has taken an interest in the boy. He explains that when he talked to his mother before bed last night, he highly praised the boy's skills and hard work during training. He only wanted to make sure his mother didn't underestimate his friend, but now he realizes her plan is to recruit the young man into the clan. The strategy would be to shower him with gifts and eventually win him over using a beautiful young woman. He tells his friend to relax, assuring him the defensive accessory is just a polite gesture. Then he asks if the boy has any plans right now and hears that he has training scheduled with Mesa. The blonde kid points out that training is still hours away, and even if they aren't in the capital, the area has plenty of cool spots to check out. He asks his friend if he's really going to waste such a beautiful day cooped up in his room studying magic. He drags his friend along, telling him life is way too short not to have some fun. Elsewhere, a crowd of people is enjoying various games. The heir points toward a counter where people are placing bets. The blonde kid suggests they play too, but the boy shakes his head. So, the heir points toward a different area of the venue. Turan looks over and spots something that catches his eye. He takes a closer look at a poster on the wall. His eyes widen in shock as he reads what's on it. He realizes the person featured in the ad is actually someone super famous. Turan thinks the face on the poster looks identical to Kiorn. Meanwhile, in another part of the venue, various weapons are on display for the crowd. A narrator explains that back around the year 2195, when the warriors of Arabian marched into the hostile desert, a paladin named Kiorn stood out among them. With the help of heavenly forces, Kiorn defeated his enemy after a brutal battle. The performance is a massive spectacle, and the crowd erupts in applause. The blonde guy asks Turan if he enjoyed the show, and Turan nods. Turan recalls the veteran warrior claiming he was just a simple soldier, and thinks to himself that the man was being incredibly modest. He plans to ask Kiorn if that legend is actually true if they ever cross paths again. Later, in another room, morning light streams through the glass window. Turan wakes up and is startled by who's standing right in front of him. It's the veteran with the scar on his face. The veteran asks if Turan's body has recovered yet, and Turan says yes. immediately asking what this surprise visit is about. The instructor says he saw great physical potential in Turan, leaving the young man trying to figure out what he really means by that. The man tells Turan to get up and start physical training, reminding him that nobody gets stronger by resting. The veteran asks if he's up for the challenge, and Turan accepts in his head, figuring he should take the opportunity to learn. Just then, the blonde heir walks in, excited to tell him about a great play happening today, but he freezes mid-sentence when he spots his own uncle in the room. The veteran mentions he's running a training session and suggests his nephew join in to get some exercise too. The blonde guy immediately runs off, making up a quick excuse that he's still way too tired. Turan asks why his friend ran away like that. A few hours later, Turan completely understands why he fled. The instructor barks at him to focus on his physical limits and orders him to do another rep. To wrap up the grueling workout, the man orders one final set of movements. Finally, the instructor calls it a day and wraps up the training. Totally spent, Turan collapses onto the floor from sheer exhaustion. The veteran asks if he's tired, and Turan sighs in agreement. The man explains that since Turan is a caster, he's lucky he won't have to do this kind of physical conditioning forever. Turan asks what the difference is, and the instructor explains that a normal body weakens over time, even after training. However, mages use mana to keep their muscles firm, meaning once their body becomes as tough as steel, they never lose that strength. Smiling, the veteran remarks that quick breather should be enough rest. Turan complains, saying he needs way more time to fully recover. The instructor's grin widens as he ignores the complaint, telling Turan that his body is now ready to start weapon techniques and hand-to-hand combat. The training routine under the Burt clan turns out to be absolutely brutal for Turan. The young man takes a deep breath, trying his best to keep up with the grueling demands. The veteran explains that they use a special sword that multiplies their own body weight, warning him that any slip-up will lead to serious injury. Back home, Turan trains with Mesa, who advises him to utilize the friction generated by his fingertips. 3 whole weeks fly by without them even realizing it. Suddenly, the surrounding air shifts as an intense, mystical energy begins to manifest. The boy sighs, thinking he just failed yet another attempt to pull off the technique. Mesa points out that this task seems unusually complicated, even for someone with his skill level. He explains that it makes sense why he's struggling, since he isn't originally from the Arabian territory. Mesa admits she's having a hard time too, since she never imagined she'd have to direct an electrical discharge in such a specific way. She asks if it isn't as simple as just shooting and hitting the target, but he tells her it's way more complicated than that. Just then, a voice calls out for Mesa from outside. The visitor looks at the boy and asks Mesa who he is. Mesa coldly tells him it's none of his business, reminding him she strictly forbade anyone from the main clan from coming near her. The man tries to excuse himself, saying the summon came directly from the family head, but she warns him there will be consequences for this. The messenger then delivers the news. The Dark Elf forces have launched a massive invasion in the southern region. He explains that several provinces have already fallen, which is why the Patriarch is putting together a military expedition. The boy realizes the enemy has finally made their move. After hearing him out, Mesa tells the messenger she understands and will return to her family's lands soon. With everything going on, she figures it's time to say goodbye to the friends she's made. She also feels she needs to pay them back for using that disgusting decomposition magic. She looks up at the sky, as if offering a prayer to some god. Then she looks at the boy and asks if he knows that electricity was once part of the human body too. This piece of information leaves him deeply lost in thought. Mesa smiles and says there's no way he could have known, since it's a closely guarded secret of her lineage. She tells him they can consider his debt settled now that she's taught him properly. She goes on to explain that whenever a person sees or feels something, the body sends a tiny electrical signal to the brain. She explains that this signal goes from the eyes to the brain for sight and from the nose to the brain for smell. Hearing her explanation makes the boy eager to try out the power for himself. To him, it feels like he just needs to observe something as simple as the flapping of a butterfly's wings. She continues her lesson, saying it shouldn't take much for someone as capable as him to activate this power. She explains that he just needs to focus deeply and resonate with the electrical impulses in his muscles. She warns him that at first, the electricity will feel incredibly tiny, but soon, that current will start flowing throughout his entire body. She says that by accelerating those electrical signals along a specific path, you can control exactly where the electricity goes. The boy follows her instructions, doing exactly what she just described. He feels the electricity course through his entire body, completely opening up his senses. The two stand in silence, just staring at each other as she begins to manifest a magnetic force. Something seems to resonate, and she displays her power right in front of him. As she speaks, the expression on her face slowly begins to change. The boy seems to instantly grasp everything she's trying to show him. Suddenly, he feels as if millions of lightning bolts are surging through his body all at once. An agonizing pain shoots through him. Mesa smiles, knowing he succeeded, and explains that the pain is just because he recklessly unleashed his mana. She warns him that the headaches will make it hard to adjust at first, but once he gets the hang of it, he'll be able to keep the power active for a long time. Even though Turan is grateful for the lesson, he feels like what he gave her in return is nothing compared to how amazing this power is. Leaping up into the air, she tells him to just look at it as an incentive, a sort of investment. She jokes that if he ends up learning even more incredible magic in the future, she's going to come back and collect. Turan stands there watching her fly away, hearing her voice fade into the distance as she yells that she'll charge him for every single detail. Meanwhile, an eagle soars rapidly through the sky. From the bird's eye view, it looks like military forces are gathering down below. That is the city of Morgan, the heart of the Dakine Plains. The combat forces serving Arabian are widely admired for all their glory. This is just a departure ceremony to go hunt dark elves, but it looks like a full-blown victory parade. Isis points out everything he's seeing and tells his new friend that with a military force like that, they're bound to crush the necromancers. When he spots his cousin, he tries his best to wave and get her attention. But he's quickly told to behave himself since he's a noble. Everyone is thrilled by the arrival of the family head, and Turan and the others look up at her with pride. The entire army stands at attention, waiting for orders. Turan realizes that this person is the current head of House Arabian. The stern-faced, red-haired man is indeed the current leader of the house. People look at Badal Arabian and whisper about the intense look in his eyes. On top of that, Turan notices that the family head's complexion looks terrible. Rumor has it he was gravely injured in the past during a battle against the head of House Ajar. But since that was a long time ago, Turan figures his poor health might just be due to old age. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts, and the excited crowd seems to lose their confidence. One of them even looks up at the sky, as if expecting something bad to come from above. They notice the sky starting to darken all of a sudden. Then, the head of the house raises his hands, as if he's about to bless everyone there. His eyes change color, showing that he's channeling his power. Within seconds, he begins to control his power through the clouds and the sky. Everyone sees the bright light as a symbol of Arabian's strength and greatness. With that, the crowd cheers, calling on the Lord of Thunder to protect his descendants. Turan is amazed that, despite his weakened body, the man can still put on such a massive display of power. He easily blankets the land with thunder and lightning, demonstrating the absolute peak of human magic. Later on, Turan is handed an item meant to give his physical resistance a quick boost. Without even needing to inject mana, his resistance increases so much that it matches the level of nobles from the Guardian lineage. The young man handing it over warns him that it drains a lot of mana, so he shouldn't keep the item active for too long. Turan is incredibly grateful, realizing this is an amazing treasure. The matriarch mentions that if he's interested, he is more than welcome to formally join their family. She has always shown him a lot of affection, especially out of gratitude for saving her precious child. Turan thanks her, but he knows things won't be that simple. She says she already heard his story from her son, so she knows he has his own goals to pursue. Turan thanks the lady and promises he will never forget the hospitality she showed him. After talking to the old lady, Turan gets ready to head out. That's when he notices that other people want to say goodbye to him too. Everyone there is incredibly grateful for everything Turan did for one of their family members. Then, one of them tosses him an object and tells him to keep it. The man explains it's a magic tool. It doesn't have any crazy functions, but it's extremely durable and has a very sharp blade. Turan thanks him from the bottom of his heart, knowing it's going to be super useful. The man is so grateful he even calls Turan Master. Right after that, a subtle smile crosses Turan's face. After a quick smile, he just turns around and continues on his way. Like a good friend, Aziz offers Turan a cloak. As soon as the cloak is placed on his shoulders, Turan asks what exactly it is. His friend reminds him that he had mentioned being jealous of their clothes, and explains that this cloak doesn't get dirty easily. Aziz hands him some other clothes too, explaining they actually self-repair if they get damaged. Turan is thrilled, since he now has a brand new cloak, shirt, pants, and other gear. After handing over the gifts, his friend asks where Turan plans to go next. Turan takes a deep breath and says he's heading to Carmane, a city Aziz has also been to. Because of that, Aziz gives him some advice, warning him to avoid traveling by ship since the waves out there are brutal. As a sign of their friendship, his friend tells him to stay safe and to come back one day to pay him back for the cloak. Time passes, and we see Turan traveling down a road. He walks along peacefully, thinking about how he has to go the rest of the way on his own now. Since he's on his own, he decides to pick up the pace and run as fast as he can. After getting a running start, he flies past everyone on the road like a bullet. Some people turn around to see what just happened. Others are sure something just zipped past them, but they can't quite tell what it was. Moving at that insane speed, he blazes past the village houses. He also runs along the shores of some lakes. Turan runs so fast for so long that he finally feels the need to slow down. He keeps jogging, but not nearly as fast as before, until he eventually slows to a walk. By now, he's practically at the foot of the mountain. From here on out, he decides to rely on his sense of smell, which has never let him down. He calms himself to sniff the air, and immediately picks up on something coming from a specific direction. At first, he thinks it's just a normal campfire, but then he realizes it's a disgusting stench like a burning animal. He focuses even harder to pinpoint where the foul smell is coming from. That's when he comes across across a horrific scene, a village that looks like it was attacked, burned to the ground, and abandoned. Several bodies there are already decomposing. Many others were tied up before being executed. He figures the place was hit by bandits since the Dark Elves shouldn't have made it this far. Still, something doesn't feel right, and it feels like there are pieces missing from the story. Determined to find out what happened, he decides to walk a bit further in, but all he finds in the area are charred remains and traces of pure destruction. No matter how much he searched, all Turan could find were the ruins of an ancient civilization. He firmly grabbed the handles on the floor to see if there really was a basement hidden underneath. With a strong grip, he yanked the doors to break them off their hinges. As soon as he got them open, his face went completely pale. Inside the basement, he saw someone who looked exactly like the goddess of corruption. The little girl inside jumped in fear when the doors were suddenly busted open. Turan walked down the steps and told her to calm down, assuring her he wasn't an enemy. Hearing this, the girl calmed down a bit, realizing he was only there to help. He approached her gently and asked her to tell him what had happened. She explained that someone had wiped out everyone in the village, and she thought it was a mage. As she was speaking, her strength completely gave out and she collapsed. Turan scooped her up in his arms, relieved to see she wasn't seriously hurt, just completely exhausted. His priority now was to get her to safety. Suddenly, he heard someone shout that they had found what they were looking for. When he looked up, he saw someone pointing right at him. Turan realized he was surrounded by a whole group, led by a woman who looked absolutely furious. She ordered him to get on his knees, warning him she wouldn't say it twice. It seemed she was mistaking Turan for the one responsible for destroying the village. Losing her patience, she demanded once again that he put the child down immediately. Another mage in the group, despite shaking with fear, was also determined to take him down. Turan tried to get them to calm down, explaining that this was all just a misunderstanding, but the group wasn't listening, and they were ready to attack at any second. They looked like they were about to strike without warning. Suddenly, the woman yelled at her companion, telling him not to blast the man directly, or he might hit the kid. The man apologized for the slip-up, while the woman stared ahead, utterly confused. Turan had raised his hand to shield himself and the little girl from the blast. When the dust cleared, everyone saw him standing there, comfortably holding and protecting the child. Turan looked down at the artifact he'd just received, never imagining he'd have to use it this soon. The other mages were stunned to see he didn't have a single scratch on him, having blocked the attack perfectly. What terrified them even more was that he did it without using any magic, relying purely on his physical body. This caught the woman's attention, and she wanted to know what kind of lineage he possessed to have such an incredible defense. Turan called out to them, repeating that he wasn't the one who attacked the village, and that this was all a mistake. He made it clear that if they attacked him again, he wouldn't just defend himself, which made the archer hesitate. She knew she had to prioritize the safety and well-being of the child in his arms. Lowering her bow, the woman admitted it didn't make much sense for someone to cause this kind of destruction for no reason. Still, she found it hard to believe he had stayed behind just to rescue a child. She introduced herself and asked him for his name. The woman explained that even though everything pointed to him being guilty, she was willing to try and believe his story. Turan suggested they just ask the little girl once she woke up, since she was the one who saw the real culprit. As soon as he said that, he noticed one of the people in the group had a very strange reaction. The young blonde girl doubts the kid actually saw the culprit. She mentions the killer's nickname and finds it weird that our MC doesn't know anything about him. She explains that the culprit is a rogue mage who's been attacking isolated villages for months. Since he never leaves any survivors, nobody even knows if the killer is a man or a woman. The only thing they're sure of is his nickname, the Flame Maniac, because of the fires he starts. As soon as the little girl wakes up, she describes the culprit as a bearded man wearing a red cloak. She says he looks like a scary lumberjack. This makes everyone uneasy, and the woman looks at our MC, realizing the description doesn't match him at all. The group then decides to apologize to him for their rude behavior earlier. This reminds our MC of an old noble friend of his who would also apologize whenever he made a mistake. The MC says he doesn't mind their suspicion, since the group's priority was just the child's safety. He then asks if they were planning to head to the city to capture the Flame Maniac. The blonde girl replies that now that they have a description, catching him will be way easier since they have a natural-born tracker in their group. Finding this interesting, the MC asks if they're from the Zahar family and what they're doing in a place like this. The blonde girl throws her hands up and explains that her name is Bisan Carmaine, from the Carmaine family, and that she's from Abicha. She adds that her friends are from vassal families, and only Asha is a descendant of the Zahar family. Bisan explains that Asha's bloodline manifested weakly, which they call a primitive bloodline. She then asks if the MC would be willing to help them hunt down the Flame Maniac. She offers him the entire bounty and even promises to give him her share of the mana. The MC hears her out and asks if they know how strong the Flame Maniac actually is. Bison says he's definitely a noble level mage, considering he defeated knights in the villages he attacked. The MC figures this opponent is perfect for him right now, since the weak beasts on the road aren't helping him level up anymore. He looks at her and accepts the hunt. The group decides to get the little girl to safety first, taking her to a nearby village to be cared for. They give a family enough money to raise her and warn them that they'll be keeping an eye on the situation. The MC adds that he will randomly drop by in a few years to check on how she's doing. This warning instantly puts the man who took the money on high alert. Afterward, the group returns to the site of the latest fire to look for clues. They trust that their tracker will find something in the ashes. The tracker's eyes glow, signaling the start of her search. She pinpoints a direction and guides the group, warning them they'll have to walk a bit further. They search around the burnt ruins looking for any tracks. Eventually, they find deep marks in the ground. The marks form a trail of destruction leading straight into the forest. The tracker also uses her sense of smell to sniff out the culprit's trail. She investigates by touching the ground and sniffing specific spots on the dirt. She looks back and explains to the MC that she's looking for human footprints first. After that, she'll track the scent of ash, since the killer must have some residue on his clothes if he hasn't changed. Suddenly, her eyes widen, and she announces she's found something. The tracker rushes off in the direction of the scent she just picked up. Her friends yell for her to wait because going alone is too dangerous, but she ignores them and keeps running through the forest toward the base of the mountain. Moments later, the tracker finds an underground entrance and realizes they're on the right track. The young blonde looks at our protagonist and tells him he should lead the way, while the rest of them follow behind. She then conjures a small sphere of light in her palm to light up the path. With enough light to see inside the small cave, everyone starts following the tracker. As they walk, the blonde asks the tracker if she can pick up a scent in here. The tracker uses her search skills and senses that someone is definitely hiding in the cave. With that confirmation, the group starts heading in the direction she points out. While walking through the tunnel, the blonde gets lost in thought for a moment. Further ahead, the torches on the walls light up, illuminating the way. To everyone's surprise, a strange figure is already waiting for them inside. The man glares at the group with a creepy look and asks what they're doing in such an isolated place. The protagonist asks if he's the pyromaniac, and the tracker right behind him confirms it, saying she smells the exact same strange scent on him. The archer also thinks this is their target, but suggests they confirm his identity before doing anything hasty. The man speaks in a bizarre tone, saying he gets what they're after and that they seem to be looking for trouble. He goes on to say that if they want trouble, they came to the right place, and that he can easily turn them into kebabs. The man proves he really is the pyromaniac as he starts sparking fires all over the place. As his power surges, the fire spreads, getting completely out of hand. The protagonist is well equipped and gets ready to protect himself and anyone else he can. He uses his skill to create a sturdy barrier, shielding both himself and the archer. The man is shocked to see that his intense flames didn't do a single scratch to either of them. While the enemy is distracted, the archer starts firing off a rapid stream of arrows at him. One of the shots lands a direct hit on the pyromaniac's leg, dealing massive damage. The impact of the arrow is so strong that the man can barely stay on his feet. His eyes roll back, and he looks like he's about to pass out from the pain at any second. Even though he's in agony, he refuses to let the group get away easily. The man reveals another unusual power, making massive stone claws erupt out of nowhere. The protagonist realizes the enemy can manipulate earth, which is weird since he thought the guy only had fire abilities. Either way, the protagonist doesn't waste any time and gets ready to strike. He readies his slingshot and uses his mana to charge up the stone he's about to shoot. The pyromaniac isn't backing down and starts preparing another surprise attack, but the protagonist knows that preparing an attack is useless if the enemy doesn't have any hands left to fight with. Everything happening inside the cave starts getting terrifying, even for the pyromaniac. The protagonist reveals he learned a few tricks from a friend back in the last town he visited. Now he can channel electricity, making his slingshot shots even more lethal. The electric attack is so powerful that it makes the man's eyes roll back as he completely loses control. With the man defeated, one of his stone traps crumbles and collapses on top of one of the girls. The protagonist stays focused on wrapping up the fight and finishing off the criminal. The girl watches in awe, amazed at how easily the protagonist completely neutralized the threat. Now he's holding some strange seeds in his hands. Taran throws the seeds in his hand right onto the man. Right after that, the magic kicks in. It's a sealing spell that completely locks down the man's movement and vision. Taran approaches him with a sharp object and tells him to cooperate. The man looks like he wants to say something, but he still needs a little more persuasion. Taran holds the sharp blade right up to the man's beard, telling him to remember what he did and stay still. He warns him that if he releases any mana, he's dead on the spot. Taran demands he spill everything he knows, but the man just asks how these kids managed to get here. Irritated, Taran simply replies that he has his ways. He demands to know why this rogue noble is burning down all these regions and their people. The man replies that God told him to burn everything. Everyone there finds his words terrifying and can't make any sense of it. The man screams that God showed him the secret to stealing the power of other bloodlines. He claims that if he just burns a few more humans, he'll finally obtain the fire bloodline. The young blonde thinks he's completely out of his mind and doesn't believe it's even possible to get a bloodline that way. Taran finds it disgusting that someone would commit such atrocities for a reason so ridiculous. But he starts thinking about it, trying to organize his thoughts. Turan recalls someone in the past mentioning that ordinary people could gain power by defeating demonic beasts. That person was Madame, who said they'd already seen several mages do exactly that. Now, the man keeps saying he just needs to burn a few more things to get the power of flames. Turan realizes this might not just be the rambling of a lunatic and grabs his arm tightly. He thinks that maybe, just maybe, this man actually discovered the secret of this world. With one swift strike, Turan ends the man's life. The man's lifeless body hits the ground, unable to cause any more harm. One of the group members starts feeling sick, and Beeson asks him what's wrong. The guy replies that finishing off someone helpless like that felt more like a slaughter. Beeson tells him not to talk nonsense, reminding him that the man almost killed them all. She points out he had countless victims, and that even skinning him alive wouldn't have been enough punishment. In the background, Turan spots a notebook lying on the ground. He looks through it and is deeply troubled by what he sees. The notebook has records of every single village attacked, serving as proof of the man's crimes. But as he flips the page, Turan is shocked. The notebook contains formulas he's never seen before, and he wonders if these were also taught by the voice the man called God. Beeson calls out to Turan while he's busy analyzing the book. She tells him they're going to absorb the mana now. The four of them begin absorbing all the mana left in the man's body. Sometime later, a man congratulates Beeson on the capture, saying a new star is rising in the Carmane family. She accepts the reward, saying the praise is a bit much. Beeson then tells Turan that her group is going to keep traveling and hunting demonic beasts. She hands Turan his share of the reward and asks what he plans to do next. Turan replies that he's leaving right away and heading straight for Abicha. Beeson steps closer and warns him not to repeat anything that crazy fire guy said, since it would cause absolute chaos. They say their goodbyes, confident they'll run into each other again in the future. Turan figures there's no reason to spread his suspicions anyway, especially since he doesn't have any concrete proof yet. He begins his trek through the desert toward the city of Abicha. Along the way, he notices the air is getting more and more humid. Turan snaps his fingers to cast a quick spell. Seeing the flame flicker in his hand, he realizes using fire magic is going to be tough in this climate. On the bright side, a different kind of magic feels incredibly easy to use here. His water magic is much stronger now, and it barely uses any mana. This can only mean one thing. He's finally reached his destination, Abicha. Inside a local tavern, a man asks if they're setting sail tomorrow. The ship's captain says yes, explaining they need to head back to the Enril Desert, but reminds everyone they'll have to deal with mermen along the way. The crew adds to the captain's worries, pointing out they also have to worry about pirates. The captain grumbles that at this rate, he'll end up paying for his men's coffins instead of their wages. Overhearing the conversation, Turan approaches the group. He asks if they're really heading to the Enril Desert. The captain confirms they are, but warns that the ship is completely full. He says to fit anyone else, he'd have to throw a barrel of booze overboard, which goes against his principles. Hearing this, Turan simply places his hand over a cup on the table. Confused, the captain asks what he's doing. A second later, Turan completely freezes the cup solid. The captain is stunned, barely able to believe he's looking at a mage. Realizing he's a magic user, everyone at the table jumps up and starts sucking up to him, but Turan tells them to just act normal. The captain asks what he wants, and Turan explains he needs a ride to the Enril Desert. He clarifies he doesn't want to go as a passenger, but rather as hired help to defend the ship against mermen and pirates. The captain explains his ship is pretty basic, and they can't afford a good salary or decent quarters for a night. Turan reassures him, saying the pay and conditions don't matter as long as he gets to Enril. Hearing this, the captain practically jumps out of his seat with joy. He says it's a deal, and tells Turan he can join the crew immediately. As soon as they arrive at the docks, the captain welcomes Turan aboard his humble ship. Meanwhile, in a completely different area, several houses are burning to the ground. Chaos grips the region as the flames spread out of control. A knight grips his sword, seemingly frozen in fear. Right in front of him, a monstrous demon glares him down. The knight finds his courage and slices the demon clean in half. Immediately after, he looks to the side and sees a dark elf approaching. He manages to defeat the enemy, but another dark elf instantly appears right behind them. The man puts all his strength into his sword to cut through his opponent and use the momentum to hit the next, but yet another enemy sneaks up from behind. The battle seems endless, and a massive horde of dark elves begins to surround the knight from all sides. The knight desperately realizes he won't make it out alive if the fight keeps going like this. But suddenly, tiny sparks of electricity begin to crackle in the sky. They quickly turn into lightning bolts, striking down every enemy surrounding the knight. Confused by what just happened, he looks back. He sees that Mesa is the one who saved him. He thanks her, and she tells him to regroup with the main force right away. The warrior nods and runs off toward the other soldiers. Suddenly, Kadram appears behind Mesa. He asks if she's hurt. She says she's fine, but he warns her to be careful anyway, saying she's worth way more than a couple of ordinary knights. Mesa assures him she's fine and asks how the battle is going. to which Kadram replies they've almost retaken the area, but still haven't found the tunnel. Mesa understands and tells him to let her know the second they find it, because she's going in alone. Right after that, she flies away. Kadram watches her leave, looking completely annoyed. He mutters to himself about how irritating she is, complaining that her brother spoiled her rotten. He thinks to himself that if she keeps acting like this, she'll end up just like her mother and brother. The scene cuts to the ship already sailing on the open sea. Turan stares out at the water, lost in thought. He realizes he has no idea what to do even after he reaches the lands of Zahar. He doesn't know where his father is, and sneaking into Zahar territory without a plan is extremely dangerous. All he has is a portrait of his mother and a few personal belongings, and he has no clue how long it'll take to find a lead with just that. While he's deep in thought, someone approaches him from behind. The captain of the ship walks up and asks him what's on his mind. Turan replies that he was just thinking about how massive the ocean is. The captain asks if he's getting seasick, but Turan says he feels completely fine. The captain mentions he heard Turan has been learning the ropes from the first mate. Turan confirms it, saying it's been great to learn and actually a lot more fun than he expected. Suddenly, one of the sailors yells out that food is ready. The captain smiles and tells everyone to go eat. Turan starts eating his meal, which doesn't look appetizing at all. At the same time, he overhears a sailor thanking God they brought sauerkraut on the trip. The man explains that without it, everyone's gums would start rotting from scurvy. Turan finds this interesting and asks how they figured that out, and the sailor replies that someone discovered it, and the word just spread. He adds that before they knew any better, some sailors would even eat raw mermaids. Suddenly, an alarm goes off. There's a medium-sized ship right ahead. Someone asks the lookout if they're pirates, but he says he can't tell. He warns that the ship isn't flying any house flags. One of the sailors mutters that they definitely look like pirates, adding that he knew all this quiet weather was too good to be true. Instantly, everyone on board grabs their weapons and preps for battle. One of them asks what the plan is, since the other ship is faster and will easily catch them even if they try to run. He adds that if the wind works in their favor, they might be able to dock at a nearby island. The captain then turns to Turan and asks if he can handle the situation. Turan replies that as long as there aren't any nobles or knights among them, he can take care of it easily. The captain nods and orders the crew to turn the ship around to launch a counterattack. The crew changes course, sailing right up next to the pirate ship. Seeing them approach, the pirates yell for them to stop their ship, promising to spare their lives if they cooperate. Turan asks if they'll really be spared, but the sailor next to him asks if being thrown to the sharks counts as spared. Hearing that, Turan gets ready for battle. He takes a running start and leaps straight onto the pirate ship. Turan's sudden arrival catches the pirates completely off guard. None of them expected anyone to just jump onto an enemy ship all by themselves like a sitting duck. But suddenly, the water around the ship starts to rise into the air. The water begins to freeze, forming sharp spikes. Realizing he's a mage, the pirates rush him to try and stop the spell, but they can't get close in time, and a huge chunk of them get wiped out by the ice spikes. Turan looks at his enemies and thinks that scum like them deserve no mercy. He decides there's absolutely no reason to spare a single one of them. Realizing these pirates have no honor, Turan goes straight on the offensive. The surviving pirates start to panic, yelling at each other to stop being idiots and act fast, or they're all going to die right there. A few pirates muster what little courage they have left and charge at Turan, even though they know it'll probably end badly for them. Turan just looks them dead in the eye, his calm, deep gaze reflecting the blue of the ocean. He knows what needs to be done, and right then, the surrounding sea starts to rage violently. Faced with danger, some pirates choose to charge forward and fight, while others decide to just jump overboard. But no matter what they choose, everyone here is going to meet the exact same end. Even though they're terrified, the pirates keep desperate attacks coming because they know their lives are on the line. They think that if they gang up on the young mage and attack all at once, they might stand a chance. Unfortunately for them, Turan is determined to take down anyone who stands in his way. Turan's movements get faster and more precise, letting him take on multiple opponents at the same time. With just a glance, he predicts where their strikes are coming from and knows exactly how to dodge. The pirates realize that fighting Turan up close is a terrible idea, since he easily blocks every single attack. Showing off his incredible combat skills, he uses one pirate's attack momentum to strike down another right after. Everyone on deck is panicking and wants to end this fight quickly, so Turan decides to switch up his strategy. It seems like the more he fights, the more armed pirates show up to try and surround him. Even so, Turan sticks to his plan, fighting on while manipulating the massive waves crashing around the ship. Whenever he needs to, Turan backs off slightly to give himself some space and line up his next spell. After all, he knows that certain magic attacks work much better when cast from a safe distance, and the rough sea obeys his commands with growing intensity. He keeps using his water control to deliver heavy blows, taking out the enemies who are still trying to resist. Turan's power shapes the seawater into sharp spears, skewering his opponents with ease. A few pirates still think they can catch Turan off guard in the middle of all the chaos, but any illusion of an advantage quickly vanishes against the overwhelming power and preparation of the young mage. That's when one of the guys grabbed Turan and yelled to the others that he had him pinned. His crewmates started slashing at the guy they thought was trapped, but But soon, one of the thugs' eyes went wide. He realized that no matter how hard they tried, their sharp weapons weren't leaving a single scratch on Turan. His body seemed heavily armored, as if no blade could ever pierce him. Since his enemies couldn't hurt him, Turan decided to strike back. He wasn't about to waste any more time. He easily took down multiple opponents at the exact same time. His counterattack was so fast and brutal that his enemies didn't even have time to think of a plan. The moment he realized these pirates deserved no mercy, their fate was sealed. For a long time, the only sounds echoing across the ship were screams of pure desperation. In the end, only Turan was left standing on the deck, holding his magic sword. Every single pirate who had been so sure they could defeat anyone who crossed them had been wiped out. This victory gave the sailors from the other ship the perfect excuse to claim the vessel as plunder. The whole crew was thrilled. Giving a ride to this mysterious man turned out to be an amazing deal. The captain praised Turan, joking that he also made an excellent janitor. He kept the joke going, saying that if Turan kept cleaning things up this spotlessly, his own crew would be out of a job. Noticing the mess all over Turan, one of the crew members suggested he go see the ship's doctor. Turan explained they didn't need to worry since all that blood belonged to the enemy, and with that, they set sail. The group, which started with just one ship, was now sailing with two, and the leaders gathered in the captain's quarters. The captain explained that the recovered vessel was actually a merchant ship that had gone missing in Ibiza years ago. Turan was surprised when the captain revealed that he was actually the owner of the recovered ship. Once the surprise wore off, Turan asked the captain what he planned to do with the vessel. The captain replied that there were plenty of options, like returning it to its original owner for a reward, but his plan was to sell the ship in the Northern Sea archipelago, which was right on their route. He explained that they were desperate for ships over there, so goods always sold for top dollar. Turan knew he would have to pay the crew for using their ship for transport. So, Turan proposed splitting a share of the profits, including the money from selling the ship as a service fee for the sailors. The captain found the offer very interesting and agreed to the deal. While they were talking, a crew member burst in panicking, shouting that they had found a mermaid. The captain immediately worried, thinking they were about to be attacked by merfolk. The sailor explained it wasn't an attack. The pirates had actually captured a mermaid and were keeping it locked up. He warned them that the creature was locked in the hold, and both men listened closely to the news. To hold up their end of the bargain, the crew immediately started cleaning up the deck. As they walked, the captain wanted to double-check if the valuable creature really was down in the hold. He took the opportunity to invite Turan to go down and have a look at it. On their way down, Turan asked if mermaids usually sold for a lot of money. The captain explained that the price varied, but if it was a beautiful female, the selling price could easily triple. As they stepped inside, the captain commented on how people on the mainland were absolutely obsessed with mythical creatures. As soon as they reached the hold, Turan spotted the creature curled up in a corner. After taking a closer look, they realized it was a male, which drastically dropped its market value. The captain sighed, realizing they wouldn't get much money for him since he was small and didn't look like much. They'd only get a decent price if he was actually one of those legendary royal merfolk who could turn into a fish. Annoyed, the creature snaps back, saying he's not just some random male, but Armani, the 47th prince of the northern state. The captain and Turan talk it over and agree that if this kid is actually telling the truth about being royalty, he might be worth something after all. The captain thinks he's just bluffing to avoid being thrown away and wants to see if he can actually turn into a fish. The young merman explains that he can't transform because he's out of the water and tied up in ropes. It really looks like he's just trying to trick them so he can escape. The captain asks Turan what he plans to do with their find. Turan says he's going to get rid of him since merfolk are known to eat humans. Looking at the creature curled up in the corner, they agree they can't risk letting him go back into the sea and escaping. Turan gets ready to unleash the power that will end the young merman's life. Staring death in the face, the sea prince screams at them, asking how they dare do this to him. Even so, Turan's hand keeps charging up the lethal energy. The boy begs, insisting he has never eaten a human and hasn't even thought about doing it in his entire life. But despite his desperate cries, they completely ignore him. His eyes widen and he grits his teeth in pure terror. Suddenly, he gets an idea and tells the human with the glowing hand that if he spares his life, he'll lead them to a massive treasure. Seeing that he's got their attention, the young merman thinks he might actually survive this. He claims the treasure was left behind by the gods of Freya, the very deity they worship. The kid's life is spared for now, and before long, they finally spot land. The port town is just ahead, and the crew celebrates their arrival. They're thrilled to finally get some drinks in them, since there wasn't much to do out at sea. Once they dock, the captain asks Turan if he's made up his mind yet. Turan says he's decided to check out the location, since it's not too far and he can make it back by tonight. They grab the chains holding the young merman. After putting his prisoner into a small rowboat, Turan heads out with him into the open sea. The young sea prince asks if they chained him up because they thought he would run away. He boasts that he's royalty, and a royal always keeps his word. Turan listens in silence, moving the boat forward using nothing but his own magic. As the boat glides forward, the kid warns him that if the treasure is disappointing, it's not his fault. Night falls over the ocean. Turan doesn't care about his excuses and just tells him to keep showing the way. Once they reach the coordinates, Turan gets ready and dives straight into the water. He sinks into the deep ocean, searching for the goddess's treasure. Under the water, he begins to scan his surroundings. Just as he suspected, there's a massive, incredibly powerful sea serpent guarding the ancient ruins. Now, he has to face the sheer size and power of the scaled beast. Turan is relieved when he spots the small island the merman mentioned in the distance. The place actually has a beautiful view. He puts his hands in the water to push the small boat even faster. Turan uses his scouting magic to check for any danger lurking above or below the water. He's incredibly relieved there are no mermaids around, because dealing with them would be a massive pain. At least it doesn't look like this place is their home base. Even though the tide is rough and crashing hard against the rocks, everything seems peaceful. Cut to a moment later, and their little boat is empty, as the two of them head into the forest. The merman looks around, absolutely sure that the spot they're looking for is somewhere nearby. He doesn't spot it right away, but after looking a bit closer, he realizes it's actually much closer than he thought. The merman points in the right direction, but our MC stares at the spot, wondering if the guy is actually telling the truth. The place looks completely ordinary, just a calm, quiet lake. He looks at the merman and says the lake doesn't seem that deep, but the little guy confirms it's actually about 300 meters deep. To a merman, that's nothing, but for a human, it's a pretty daunting depth. Before long, he uses a nearby tree to tie the merman up. The little prince hates being tied up again and complains that he shouldn't be doubted, swearing he would never run away. Anxious, the merman points out that if the human fails and doesn't make it back, he'll end up starving to death tied to this tree. As he takes off his clothes, he tells the merman he'd better root for his victory and safe return then. He stands there for a moment, watching his reflection ripple slowly in the lake's water. He takes a deep breath to build up his courage, then dives straight into the deep water. He plunges in and swims down as fast as he can to reach the bottom in record time. In the vast, dark blue depths of the lake, he has to search for what he came for. He looks around, hoping to find it as quickly as possible. After all, he can't breathe underwater since he doesn't have that kind of ability. Eventually, he reaches a slightly brighter area where visibility is much better. Still holding his breath for dear life, he decides to get closer to something that catches his eye. His eyes widen underwater at what's right in front of him. It's a bizarre figure that looks like a giant, completely petrified snake. The creature is colossal, but he's finally found what he was looking for. Right at the top, he spots the figure of a knight who seems to have fought the giant serpent. He's so blown away by the sight that he briefly forgets he's underwater and almost gasps. He quickly covers his mouth, reminding himself that he needs to save every bit of oxygen he has left. He swims as fast as he can toward what he saw. Even though it's petrified, the giant snake is still terrifying. But he came all this way for the ultimate prize, so he climbs to the top to see if his gamble will pay off. Looking closely at the warrior who fought the serpent, nothing seems particularly special at first glance. He isn't sure if this man actually belonged to Freya's divine tribe, and he finds it hard to believe that his physical body is still completely intact. But then, something glowing underwater on the man's belt catches his eye. The object looks a lot like a golden compass, meaning this has to be the divine treasure itself. Meanwhile, back on the shore, the little merman is still tied to the tree. Seconds later, our MC bursts from the lake, gasping for air. The little merman cheers excitedly and asks if he managed to find the treasure. Still in the water, he replies that he thinks he found something, though of course he still doesn't quite know what it actually is. Looking at the young merman now, Turan can actually see his life force. The boy's vital energy and his strongest points are laid bare right before his eyes. Holding the golden compass, Turan wonders if this is the object letting him see everyone's vital signs and internal energy. If that's the case, he decides to hold up his end of the deal, reaching out toward the merman and using a bit of his power. With that power, the chains binding the little merman snap right off. The little merman didn't think he'd be freed so easily. He actually thought he was going to be sold off again. Turan tells him he always pays back his debts, and since the kid was honest and kept his promise, he did the same. As Turan gets dressed, the little merman calls him a really nice demon. With that little thank you, the boy dives right back into the water. As soon as he hits the water, the boy begins to transform into a giant fish. This makes it obvious that the merman really is royalty. Seeing this, Turan realizes the kid was completely innocent all along. A little while later, the ship is shown docked at the harbor. As soon as Turan gets back on board, he notices several sailors being punished. They're being disciplined for the destruction they caused back in the village. Taking in the scene, Turan wants to know what's going on. Someone explains that the sailors are being punished for staying out late the night before. They ignored the captain's warnings, causing a ton of damage and starting a massive brawl at the port bar. With his new powers, Turan can easily see the life force of every single man there. He watches their life force drop as they take a beating from the punishment. After that, Turan needs to head into town to buy some supplies. Meanwhile, the ship's captain is pitching a sale to an interested buyer. The captain jumps a bit when their guest walks in. Turan has just arrived right in the middle of their negotiation. The captain introduces the man as Captain Samuel, explaining that he's agreed to buy the ship. Turan listens to the deal and thinks it's a good offer, but he sees one problem. For someone who has always lived in a small village, walking around with that much gold is going to be a hassle. He thinks it would be much better to receive the equivalent value in magic items or sacred relics instead. Samuel then suggests that Turan head to the territory's second largest city, which is home to a lineage of beast tamers. He says that since Turan has plenty of money, finding a useful beast there shouldn't be hard at all. After setting things straight, they head back out to sea. At first, the voyage seems smooth, and the crew thinks their biggest problem will just be carrying around all that cash. But the lookout quickly spots dark storm clouds right ahead. In an instant, the sky turns pitch black and the weather gets extremely rough. Massive waves slam into the ship, tossing it violently from side to side. Everyone is shouting orders to pull in the sails as fast as possible. They need to get all the cargo below deck immediately if they want to survive. With every passing second, the sea gets wilder and wilder. Taking a single step on deck becomes incredibly dangerous, and several men are swept right overboard. The crew is in a desperate situation. They have to pull down the sails, but trying to do so means risking being thrown into the raging sea. Luckily for the sailors, they have Kim on their side. Kim acts instantly, using his powers to save both the crew and the cargo. Telekinesis is just one of the many skills he has completely mastered. He uses his telekinesis to speed things up, telling the rest of the crew to head down to the shelter. Still using his power, he controls the ship's movements to keep it perfectly aligned. Without Kim's precise maneuvering, the ship and everyone on board would have been swallowed by the storm. In the end, everyone makes it out safe because of his perfect timing. Outside, the storm still rages as lightning constantly lights up the sky. Meanwhile, the crew tries to warm up in a more comfortable spot inside the ship. Many of them are shivering from the freezing sea, while others are completely soaked from the waves crashing over the deck. Kim gets worried and asks if everyone is okay, but using his powers, he can tell some of them are in really bad shape. The captain thanks him, saying none of them would be alive if it weren't for his generosity and quick thinking. When asked if they'll be able to escape the storm, the captain says it all depends on the ship and the helmsman. Still, it's clear that the entire crew is freezing and shaking. Seeing this, Kim decides he needs to do something to help them. He takes the initiative and asks everyone to gather around him in a circle. With all his experience at sea, the captain immediately worries that Kim wants to start a campfire, which would be incredibly dangerous on a wooden ship. But Kim assures him that he'll keep the flame small and under complete control. He keeps his word, creating the perfect flame to warm everyone up. The warmth from the fire spreads, quickly making the room cozy. It doesn't take long for the crew to feel the relief of the heat. Everyone starts to relax in the pleasant energy, amazed to see such refined magic, which is extremely rare. The captain thinks to himself that he finally understands the ancient verses he used to hear about the majesty of mages. Those verses said that humans serve mages, and mages rule over humans, but they also protect them. The journey continues until they reach Komad, the largest city in the northern Enril Desert. At the port, workers begin unloading the crates from the ship. The captain hands Kim some money, saying that even though it's a small amount, it's for his services. He explains that the crew pooled this money together from the profit of selling the pirate ship, and insists he take it so they don't anger the gods. Kim accepts the reward and promises that if they ever cross paths again, he'll buy them all a real meal. Hearing this, the sailors start shouting his name and calling him Sir Knight. They all bid him a loud farewell, saying they're going to miss him. The captain bows deeply as a sign of respect and gratitude for his help. Kim watches them, thinking to himself that these guys are really a fun bunch. He enters the city where the locals are going about their daily routines in the streets. Kim walks through the area, observing the bustling crowd around him. Suddenly, he senses something strange and stares intently in one direction. He sees someone unusual in the middle of the crowd, glowing with a bright blue light. That figure stands out completely from everyone else around. Kim decides to approach them and politely calls out to get their attention. The person turns around and asks if he is a knight of the Durman family. The knight quickly turns around, bows to Turan, and says he's at his service. Turan introduces himself, explains where he's coming from, and says he'd like to meet with the head of the man's family. Before long, the two of them arrive at a massive mansion. Next thing we know, Turan is sitting comfortably, dressed in some seriously elegant clothes. The man sitting across from him compliments his look, saying the outfit suits him perfectly. This man, who practically radiates power, is Cal Durman, the head of the family. For a moment, it feels like the two are having a silent standoff, sizing each other up. Faced with this intense pressure, Turan refuses to back down and stares right back. Being a good host, the head of the house kicks off the conversation by asking for his guest's name and family background. Turan gives his name and reveals he comes from a fallen lineage of guardians. He also gets straight to the point, saying he heard about their magical beasts and is here to buy one. Cal stands up and lets him know his daughter will take over the negotiations from here. Turan can't help his curiosity, so he speaks up and asks Cal if he's ever met someone who looked just like him before. Turan's curiosity grows even more when he notices the man hesitate for a split second after hearing the question. Cal admits that Turan does indeed remind him of someone he knew in the past. After that, Turan is led away by Cal's daughter, who mentions she initially thought he was just some ruined noble. She adds that since he's looking to buy magical beasts and comes from a guardian bloodline, he must be doing pretty well for himself as a mercenary. While the girl keeps talking, Turan is distracted, still thinking about what her father just said. He desperately wants to find out something about his parents, remembering details like curly hair, slightly large ears, and a straight jawline. Since his mother's features were very common, he figures the person Cal knew in the past might actually be his father. Turan is lost in thought for a while, until the young woman snaps him out of it and tells him to follow her to another room. They get ready to enter the family stable, and after walking down a long hallway, they step into a massive space. Seeing so many animals living in a setup that looks just like their natural habitat gets Turan pretty excited. He thinks the place is incredible, noting how every room has the perfect environment for each creature. It's all super impressive, but Turan starts to worry when he begins to think about how much all of this must cost. As he follows the woman, he starts thinking it might be better to just forget about buying a magical beast. Suddenly, the two of them stop, and Turan keeps worrying that there's no way he can walk out of there carrying a chest full of gold to pay for one. Just then, a pair of large black wings inside a nearby cage catches his eye. The animal inside the cage seems calm, just watching Turan's every move. The creature's eyes are incredibly vibrant and striking. Feeling like there's still hope, Turan asks the woman how much she wants for that animal. Taking a closer look at the creature, he figures it's a bargain, even though he knows it'll take almost all of his money to buy it. He also asks what the creature's special ability is, and the woman replies that it's highly intelligent. She explains that while it's a very popular species, the problem with this smart bird is that it refuses to obey anyone it thinks is dumber than itself. As the woman explains the details, the beast keeps its eyes locked onto Turan. Turan stares back at the bird and asks if it can actually understand what they're saying. He wants to test if the bird really is smart, despite its grumpy-looking face. The woman mentions the bird is indeed very clever, and she even tried teaching it to read, though that didn't work out. She thinks it's a total waste, because the animal is strong, a good size, and has already hunted and eaten several other beasts. All it needs is to learn how to behave, because if it actually listened, it would be worth double or even triple the price. For a second, it looks like the bird is trying to tell Cal something. The woman gets goosebumps, thinking the bird suddenly decided to start behaving. Cal points to himself and asks the bird if it wants to be his. He finds it pretty weird, though. He doesn't think he's anyone special, so there must be a reason behind this. He makes one thing clear. If he buys it, it'll have to do its absolute best to learn how to read. The bird nods, showing off how incredibly smart it actually is. With that, a spell is cast. Cal performs a binding magic, forging a long-term bond between them. Right after, the bird lands straight on its new master's arm. The family head is impressed by how a bird that used to be completely wild is now listening to Cal's every command. Because of that, he tells Cal to take good care of it. Then, the man says he could just let it go, but there's something that's been bothering him. He asks Cal if he happens to have any connection to a Lord Talus, but Cal has absolutely no idea who that is. Seeing Cal's reaction, the host tells him to just forget he asked. Even though they drop the subject, Cal wonders if the man saw someone else's face in him, which is why he brought up that name. So Cal decides to show him something and ask a question of his own. He pulls a piece of paper from his pocket and asks if the man recognizes the woman on it. The paper has a drawing of Cal's mother. Not knowing who she is, the man studies the drawing closely, but no names come to mind, and he comments that if he had ever met such a beautiful woman, he definitely wouldn't forget her. Cal thanks him and decides to let the bird fly around for a bit. Once the payment is settled, the deal is officially done. Now Cal just needs to take his new pet and head out, but first, he decides to make sure everything works. He grabs onto the bird's talons to go for a quick spin. The bird immediately takes off, carrying Cal down the road at high speed. Cal hangs onto its feet as they fly, absolutely loving the experience. After a while, he heads back, and the servants serve him a nice meal. The girl who helped with the deal asks if he had a good trip. Then, she decides to introduce Cal to the rest of the crew. A man covered in scars asks if that place is anywhere near Arabian. The girl snaps at him, telling him not to lump their noble guest in with those vultures. After getting scolded, the man introduces himself and mentions he comes from a historic lineage. The two of them share a firm handshake, but the grip is way too tight to be just a friendly greeting. The big guy instantly notices Cal's incredible strength. As expected of a guardian, he's seriously tough. The woman asks to see the bird he bought, but Cal explains that he already let it fly free. However, he mentions he can call it back whenever he needs to. All he has to do is call, and the massive bird will appear in an instant. She gets super interested in the bird and tries to touch it, but the eagle aggressively snaps at her, making it clear it won't tolerate being touched by someone like her. Getting rejected like that, the woman's only reaction is to start cursing out the bird. The eagle gets incredibly pissed off, but Turan steps in and tells it to calm down. After that little scene, they are served a massive feast. The spread looks like it was made for royalty, and as they eat, they start talking about the appearance of the dark elves in the west. They talk about the Arbian subjugation force and mention that their commander is named Mesa. The dinner goes on as they chat about this and other rumors. The obnoxious woman keeps talking trash, saying that the rival family's commander is incredibly ugly. She also mentions they have an heir who lives a very comfortable, sheltered life. Turan just listens with his head down until the name Lord Talus comes up. Turan cuts in and asks who exactly this Lord Talus is. They explain that he's the younger brother of the family head and the current second in command of House Zahar, meaning he's the one actually running the show. Turan starts to realize that his father might be someone way more important than he ever imagined. While he's lost in thought, the eagle tries to get his attention. The bird uses its beak to write in the dirt, trying to show off what it learned. But Turan is completely distracted by his own thoughts. He keeps worrying about what will happen if that powerful man really is his father. He's terrified that the moment that family finds out he exists, they'll crush him like a bug. Shaking it off, he finally looks down at the bird. The eagle had written Black Eagle in the dirt. Turan reads it and points out that its spelling is a bit off. Then he asks if it has picked out a name yet. The eagle writes Not Yet on the ground. Turan teases it, asking if its name is going to be Not Yet. The eagle looks totally offended and shakes its head no. Turan laughs and asks the eagle to explain why. The eagle writes on the ground that it likes Turan. He pets the bird and tells it that it still has a lot of studying to do. Still, he can't stop thinking about what the eagle wrote. Just then, a man approaches and says he's going out to hunt to warm up, inviting Turan to tag along. Turan explains that he's actually leaving today, and the guy acts disappointed, complaining that Turan should have told him sooner since they're supposed to be friends. Turan knows that despite the friendly act, the guy just wants to show off and flex his strength over others. The eagle glares at the man as he boasts about knowing the area inside and out, offering to guide Turan if he needs it. Turan politely declines, and the man turns to leave, telling him to let him know if he changes his mind. Turan finds it weird that the guy gave up so easily, which makes him pretty uneasy. Afterward, he walks over to a nearby building. When they step inside, Turan says he didn't need an escort, but the man explains he's just following the Lord's orders. Turan walks up to the counter and asks for a desert guidebook and religious texts on Enril. He places 2 items on the counter and says that'll be his payment for the books. Turan quickly leaves the fortress, clutching his new book. He notes that while the map inside is pretty bad, the Britso Zahar book was funded by the main house, so the information should still be useful. Suddenly he senses some strange movement and looks over to the side. It's that same mysterious energy from before. Both Turan and his eagle immediately sense something suspicious. Then, the gates swing open, and just like that, Turan is outside the fortress. Once they're a safe distance away, he tells his eagle that they should probably slow down a bit. The eagle shakes its head, clearly disapproving of the idea. But Turan explains that he just wants to walk for a while. Meanwhile, an owl watches them from a distance. The bird perches on a tree branch as Turan and his eagle pass by. That's when Turan notices something off. He stops to analyze the situation. He calls out, telling whoever is following him to show themselves. A man steps out of hiding, asking if Turan knew he was there the whole time. He points at the eagle and asks if Turan is stupid for walking instead of riding his massive bird. The man claims he saw a young guy traveling all alone and just wanted to help out. Turan cuts straight to the chase and asks if the man is after his mana. Dolph tries to scramble for a good lie. With a creepy smirk, the man asks if Turan really came out here all alone, knowing how dangerous it is. Turan mutters that he finally understands why nobles absolutely despise ruined, bankrupt nobles. Dolph's grin grows wider as he laughs at hearing that from someone whose situation is just as bad, if not worse, than his own. He knows Turan has powerful mana, but his physical body is incredibly weak. Turan agrees, saying that even though his body is weak, his overflowing mana makes him the perfect prey. He then signals his eagle to take flight. The man listens closely to what Turan is saying. Turan starts releasing his mana, remarking that he successfully lured his opponent out. As Turan begins to vanish from sight, the man licks his lips, thinking this is going to be a delicious meal. Dolph chuckles, thinking it's just cheap concealment magic used by useless knights to spy on people. He warns Turan to stop running, boasting that dealing with concealment magic is incredibly easy. But suddenly the man realizes he can't sense any presence at all. His eyes widen in realization as a terrifying possibility crosses his mind. Out of nowhere, an attack flies right at him. Dolph has no idea what's happening. He wonders where that stone even came from. Before he can react, another strike flies in and hits him dead on. An even heavier blow slams right into his stomach. Desperate, he tries to guard against the incoming barrage. Finally, he activates his magic, conjuring a ring of fire all around him. Dolph figures that if he can just light up the area, he'll be able to break his opponent's stealth, and then all he needs is one solid hit. Suddenly, a fireball appears in the sky. Actually, it's not just one. 6 massive fireballs form high above. The fireballs immediately start raining down on his opponent. But right then, the confident smirk vanishes from Dolph's face, replaced by pure worry. The attack lands a direct hit. Dolph channels mana into his feet and stomps the ground hard, desperate to escape the blast. With that, all the fireballs vanish. Even so, he's badly hurt and screams at the protagonist to stop hiding and show himself. Dolph keeps shouting, completely losing his patience. He looks around frantically, trying to find a way out of this. He's so incredibly tense that sweat starts pouring down his face. He realizes he needs to run because there is no way he can win this fight. Dolph knows that fighting a mage of that bloodline in the middle of a desert puts him at a massive disadvantage. He even rips off his shirt just so he can run faster. Dolph figures that unless his opponent has a bloodline with physical stats as crazy as his own, there's no way he'll be able to catch up. But then, he starts to suspect something and looks up at the sky to make sure. High above, he sees Ian holding onto his eagle's talon, and the eagle looks absolutely furious, since Dolph has been nothing but a massive pain. Ian remarks that someone like Dolph should have died a long time ago, unless he was carrying some kind of magic artifact. Terrified, the man begs Ian for mercy. Ian pauses, thinking it over for a brief second, but he quickly replies that Dolph knows damn well that's not going to happen. Using the eagle's pure rage to his advantage, Ian unleashes a massive wave of power. The devastating attack hits Dolph head-on, completely crushing him. Ian looks down at Dolph's defeated body, realizing the guy was actually much stronger than he expected. He reflects that if Dolph had been an official guardian of Zahar, his stone-throwing trick might not have worked at all. Ian reaches out his hand, declaring that it's time for the feast to begin. With that, all of the man's mana begins to drain away. Ian absorbs all of that magical energy in one single gulp. At the same time, the object strapped to Ian's waist also starts drawing in some of the mana. Ian looks down, a bit confused by what's happening. Both he and the eagle watch as the object greedily devours the energy. Ian realizes that this item is capable of storing magical power. He wonders exactly how the artifact works, and decides he'll have to examine it more closely later. The eagle prepares to lift Ian into the air once again. Ian shields his eyes from the sun, looking out toward the horizon. He tells himself that the tomb of the gods is just ahead. Sometime later, in a different location, Ian is seen talking to an informant. She tells him he was incredibly reckless to run away from home, and asks if he ran into any bandits or magic beasts along the way. Turan explains that he just got really lucky, and then asks how to get into the Tomb of the Gods, mentioning he read in a book that there's an entry fee. The informant says it's usually a simple process, but access is currently blocked. She explains that some VIPs arrived a week ago, and the entrance has been closed off ever since. She points her index finger upward, hinting that these are some seriously high-status people. Turan finds the whole situation pretty suspicious. Meanwhile, in another area, a group of men are gathered together. One of the guys wants to know where Purga is. Purga replies that he's right there, and tells him he doesn't need to yell. The young guy blames everything on Purga, saying they wouldn't be in this mess if he hadn't insisted on coming inside. Purga tells him to stop shifting the blame, pointing out that the kid came along of his own free will. Then, he tells the kid to shut up. He remembers his grandfather telling him about a hidden underground area inside the Tomb of the Gods, and how discovering this secret could make him the head of the family. He ponders the legend, and what this place actually is. He used to think it was just a myth, but now he realizes a place this well hidden really might hold some clues. Before he can finish his train of thought, he spots a horde of monsters heading straight for him. He realizes this secret is a nightmare, and he never would have come in here if he knew the place was crawling with monsters. He asks how much water they have left, and the kid answers that they're completely out. He has no idea what's going on. His eyes widen as he suddenly senses something. Even though he doesn't know the language, he can perfectly understand what the voice is saying. The kid says it's the Death Hunter, and the man asks if he's already back. The scene cuts to another location. Turan thinks it's stupid to just let a few people handle everything on their own. He figures it's best to keep a low profile, since it would be trouble if anyone recognized his face. Turan approaches a merchant and asks what a certain item is, and the man tells him it's saltpeter. Turan thinks to himself that he's heard of this material before. He pulls out a book to check, knowing the information must be in there. He finds out the reason they gave up on it was because they lacked all the necessary ingredients for the recipe. Turan asks the merchant if he has any sulfur, but the man says he's never heard of it. Another vendor chimes in, explaining that sulfur can only be found in volcanic regions. Turan thinks that if he had known that earlier, he would have looked in Komad. The merchant asks if he wants to buy some brown sugar since it's super rare, but Turan explains he doesn't like sweets. Later, in a different area, Turan gets his slingshot ready. Turan fires a projectile right at a rock. It hits the rock with massive force. He notes that using sand instead of regular stones makes a huge difference. He can actually change the shape of the projectiles midair. Since he only has 5 or 6 stones, he has to be extremely careful. This technique is also great for binding enemies' ankles and blocking their vision. With that in mind, he wonders what those nobles have been doing inside the tomb for so many days. Turan thinks maybe it's best to just head to another city. It seems like the perfect plan. Watching from behind a rock, he realizes he just needs to sneak inside, and if he gets caught, he can always just run. Suddenly, Turan hears a noise and quickly hides. 2 guards walk past chatting, saying all that noise isn't really necessary. One of them kicks something on the ground. Turan wonders why the guards are treating those people like that. As he heads down the stairs, he starts to see shadows moving. Curious, Turan decides to peek and see what's going on. He spots a few people and someone who looks like a prisoner. The prisoner asks what's happening. Turan listens as another man snaps back, telling the prisoner that questions aren't allowed. He originally thought they were just kidnappers, but this seems way more sinister. One of the men orders the prisoner to carry the cargo toward the hole. Turan watches them and hesitates, wondering if he should really go in, though the air coming from inside feels pretty fresh. So he starts making his way inside. Turan figures this must be some kind of beast-controlling magic. A man with a mustache asks if Lord Purga is doing okay. Turan overhears him saying things will go south fast if the Lord's rivals find out about this. Now everything clicks for Turan. This is the real reason they've been occupying this place for so long. He takes a moment to process the whole situation. While it definitely looks dangerous, he feels like it could also be a massive opportunity. Their reasons don't really matter anyway because Turan wants something that's hidden inside. With that, he starts heading down into the hole. Suddenly his vision starts to go completely white. Turan finally manages to slip inside. With a pounding headache, he realizes he was being an idiot. Purga might not even be the type of guy to return a favor. He looks over in the direction of some screaming. He sees a young man collapsing to the ground. Purga says everything is going great and orders them to bring in more people from outside. He also demands they deal with that annoying noise, since they need to save food anyway. Seeing all of this, Turan finally puts the pieces together. He realizes this man is the infamous Purga Zahar, a man who takes lives just to get water without feeling a shred of guilt would never pay back a debt. Turan's eyes widen in shock. He realizes he was dead wrong. He is not the hunter of the night here. A long, long time ago, giants ruled over the fertile plains of Enril. Driven by an insatiable thirst, they enslaved humans and drank their fluids every single day. But everything changed on a pitch-black night, when not a single light shone in the sky. That's when someone suddenly appears. He is the Night Hunter, from Freya's divine people. With his arrows, he slays the giants and frees humanity once and for all. In gratitude, the humans offer him their 3 most beautiful women as brides. From their descendants, one group inherits the power to turn invisible, the second group gets the ability to control shadows, and the third is granted the power of poison. But after the Night Hunter ascends to the heavens, the 6 siblings start fighting over who will rule the desert. The oldest brother, who has the power of invisibility, wants no part in the conflict and runs away. However, the second brother with shadow control and the third with poison go to war. In the end, the oldest brother returns, defeats them both, and takes complete control of the desert. That man became the great ancestor of the Zahar clan. Suddenly, a voice asks Turan if he is the Night Hunter. He has no idea why he's hearing that name right now of all times. Turan wonders if this has something to do with the Zahar nobles who entered earlier. He thinks he might also be a distant descendant of theirs. Suddenly, Turan senses something off and whips around. He's sure there's really something there. Turan can feel a faint blue energy coming from the distance. He strains his eyes to see what it is. Slowly and silently, he starts creeping closer. Moments later, Turan spots a monster with its back turned. The monster is literally drooling, dying to get a taste of Turan. Turan finds the creature absolutely hideous. Sensing a presence, the monster suddenly snaps around to face him. Turan gasps, realizing he's been spotted. Without wasting a second, the beast charges straight at him. Turan notices the monster is incredibly fast, so he gets ready to counterattack. Turan releases his power, hitting not just one, but 3 monsters at once. The monsters feel the impact, realizing the heat is way too intense. Taking advantage of their distraction, Turan takes a few steps back to regroup. He wonders how these things manage to pinpoint his location. At least their detection range seems to be pretty short. Turan grabs an object and tosses it into the air. It's one of his stones, because he knows he needs to keep the upper hand in this fight. Right after, he unleashes a flurry of attacks. He lands a direct hit, taking down one of the monsters. The other monsters couldn't care less about their dead comrade. Turan finds their reaction pretty interesting. He watches as the remaining monsters run away, leaving their fallen partner behind. Turan reaches out to drain the monster's mana. He watches closely to see if it actually works. The creature's mana begins to drain. He realizes it really is a magical creature. Turan looks at his hand, thinking over everything that's happening. The amount of absorbed mana is tiny. With his current level and stats, he should be able to sense way more energy than this. On top of that, the sacred artifact isn't even reacting. He wonders what exactly this creature is. Turan hears that mysterious voice again and mutters that he's sick of hearing it. Just then, he senses something different and looks over. Hearing footsteps, he quickly backs away. A group of people approaches the area. One of the men tells everyone to halt. The group stops immediately and looks at the dead monster on the ground. One of them asks if their target went this way, but another replies it's impossible to tell since they lost their bearings a long time ago. Purga warns them that there's a rat hiding nearby. One of the men asks if it could be a rescue team, but his comrade replies that anyone entering this place would make too much noise, so they would have noticed by now. Purga orders them to set traps around the area, determined to catch this rat. He orders them to light up the area so they can hunt down the intruder first, but then he changes his mind and calls off the search, deciding to let the intruder run free a bit longer to act as bait for the monsters. Turan just watches silently as the men walk away. He crosses his arms, thinking about how pathetic the group is. 3 days pass, with Turan and Purga's group living in constant tension inside the labyrinth. Thanks to the sacred artifact's vision, Turan can clearly see that the traps they set are meant for him. But in the end, Purga's own men are the ones who end up falling into them. Turan starts marking the ground to keep track of where he's already been. Some of the passages are completely blocked by an absurd number of strange creatures. He decides to use Purga's group to clear his way forward. Missing out on draining their mana is no big deal to Turan anyway, since the amount he'd get from them is minuscule. He just watches as the men fight off the creatures. Purga's group is already showing signs of extreme exhaustion. One of the men complains that the creatures just keep on coming. Another comments that if he knew it would be like this, he would have spared some of their lives earlier. Turan thinks about how despicable these people are. More monsters join the fray, making the battle even more chaotic. Turan plans to take advantage of the situation. While they make noise and act as monster bait, he's going to investigate the rest of the area. A massive door appears ahead of him. Turan stops and stares at the structure. Struck by the sheer size of the door, he wonders if this could be the exit to the labyrinth. His eyes widen as he realizes something. The eye on the door starts to move. It asks if he's the chaser hunter. But after taking a closer look, the eye changes its mind and says he isn't allowed to enter. The eye tilts downward to get a better look. It focuses on the item hanging from his waist. That's when the eye announces that the condition has been met. The eye asks if he wants to enter. He ponders the title the door just mentioned. That class belongs to a lineage he hasn't even awakened yet. The door asks again, wanting to know if he wants to go inside. He realizes the eye isn't actually looking at him, but at the item he's wearing. He asks what a wave walker is, and the door replies that his information request has been approved with no restrictions. The door explains that it grants underwater breathing and boosts physical stats in water environments. He then asks what the eye is, and it replies that it's the door's spirit. Wondering if this is just like the librarian, he asks what's inside, why it was created, and how to get out. The spirit explains that whoever collects all 4 correct types and defeats the labyrinth lord will become the mind hunter. He can't believe what he's hearing. Suddenly, something starts happening to the door. The door mutters something about 4 complete types being detected. It warns that there are intruders nearby. Decreeing immediate judgment, the door orders the labyrinth lord to come forth. He gets into stance, preparing for the upcoming fight. Then, the door begins to creak open. A massive monster steps out from inside. He can't believe his eyes. It's the boss monster itself. With a smirk, the monster calls him a fake and says all fakes must die. He quickly readies his slingshot. He fires a powerful shot right at the monster's face. He follows up by bombarding the enemy with gold and blue magic. The monster crosses its arms to block the incoming attacks. Staring down at the boy, the monster scoffs and says that barely tickled. He is definitely not happy with how things are looking. He realizes he doesn't stand a chance in a direct head-on fight. The monster orders him to stay put. All the nearby monsters hear their master's command. They all lunge forward, trying to attack the boy, but he swiftly dodges every single strike. Leaping right through the crowd of monsters, he takes off running. Purga thinks to himself that that was a really close call, but as he looks ahead, he sees another monster blocking his path. He quickly casts a defensive spell to protect himself, but he can't believe how easily the monster shatters his shield. Remembering his sword, he quickly draws his weapon. He swings and lands a direct hit on the monster. As he keeps running, his mind starts racing with a million thoughts. The danger level spikes even more when the boss monster suddenly appears. Without wasting a single second, the creature launches an attack at him. Purga just slides right under the monster and keeps on running. He figures this will all be over as soon as he manages to defeat this opponent. The monster looks visibly annoyed. Meanwhile, Purga starts cooking up a plan in his head. Then he starts running even faster. He's just running blindly now, with the sole goal of escaping that monster. Back with his group, Purga starts slicing through everything in his path. He quickly takes up a position right next to his allies. Then he asks if everyone is okay. His companions tell him they are. But then, one of the men hears a strange noise and asks if the others can hear it too. The other warriors stop and listen closely to the sound. Slowly, a strange figure begins to emerge in front of them. One of the men starts babbling about the night hunter, the enemy of children, repeating the nonsensical phrase over and over. And then, the boss monster looms right in front of them. Purga warns them that the rumors are the least of their worries, and that they can't just stand there. He warns them that if they stay put, they're all going to die. The young man's jaw drops as he faces the overwhelming presence of the creature. All his companions charge forward together to attack the monster. The group's plan now is to take it down once and for all. But the man who tries to land the first blow is easily swatted away and stopped by the monster. It seems like the boss monster is just playing with these warriors. One of them gets furious and yells at the monster to disappear, but the creature effortlessly crushes his attack. The entire group starts getting overwhelmed by the enemy's counterattacks. One of them thinks this is a really bad sign, especially since even the smaller monsters are joining the attack now. He knows that if things keep going like this, None of them will make it out alive. Just then, the man looks to the side as he notices some movement. He sees that even a tiny rat is struggling and fighting just to survive. Another guy, his eyes red with pure rage, grips his axe tightly. He charges forward with everything he's got and strikes the monster's leg. Caught completely off guard, the monster stumbles to the side. The guy actually starts laughing at the beast, but seconds later he gets trampled and sent flying. His partner's eyes go wide in sheer terror at the sight. He thinks it's all over, knowing that even if he survives, his political career is completely ruined. All of this misery is happening because of that monster. The man keeps complaining, blaming the creature for everything. Just then, he manages to pull out an object lodged in the monster's back. Gripping it tight, he starts swinging it like a sword. He charges forward and goes on the attack again. With every swing, his strikes grow heavier and stronger. Suddenly, a bright blue light floods the entire area. Looking at the situation, he realizes he has no other choice. He screams at the monster, telling it to disappear once and for all. The attack actually manages to wound the beast, but the injury only makes the creature even angrier. The man realizes things are about to end very badly for him. The monster casually thrusts its hand right into his stomach. Lying on the ground, the young man wonders where he went wrong. The light is already starting to fade from his eyes. Having defeated everyone, he wonders what the monster is looking at now, and if it's still not satisfied. Turan just watches the whole thing in silence. Turan stands right in front of the dying youth, who finally realizes that he was the real helpless rat in this situation all along. The monster looks right at them and says it finally found him. Turan readies his attack, knowing he just needs to pack enough power into it. Meanwhile, the gate monster calls Turan a fake night hunter. Ignoring the pointless trash talk, Turan stays completely focused on his strike. He puts everything into the blow, but it barely scratches the target, and that tiny scratch only makes the monster even more curious. Turan analyzes his opponent and realizes he won't be able to take this thing down in a single blow. Realizing he miscalculated the required strength, he needs to fall back and come up with a new plan. Turan quickly retreats to put some safe distance between them. This retreat only infuriates the monster, mad that it got hit with a weak attack only for the guy to run away. Checking his magic compass, Turan concludes that his main issue is a lack of raw firepower. It's a desperate situation, but he has no choice but to try his last alternative. He needs to act fast because the enemy is closing in rapidly. Ready to face the massive beast, Turan begins dodging its attacks with swift movements. He starts showing a level of strength far beyond anything he's shown so far. Positioning his weapon, Turan calculates that if he can just land a slightly deeper cut, he can finish the enemy off. Meanwhile, the monster screams that Turan is evil for killing its children and causing it so much pain. Turan wants to end this fight as quickly as possible, and the monster feels the exact same way. Turan knows his next strike has to be the final one, so he puts every ounce of his strength into one ultimate attack. But even that isn't enough to take the monster down in one shot. The monster screeches in pain and glances over at the people collapsed on the ground. Fortunately, its suffering won't last long, because Turan immediately lunges straight for its neck. The monster screams even louder, but the sheer force Turan puts into his weapon should guarantee this is the end. His weapon glows intensely, and Turan himself shines as he delivers the furious blow. The monster's screams don't last long before it finally dies. After exerting so much energy, Turan needs to take a moment to catch his breath and recover. He knows things would have been way harder if not for the bloodline power he got from Dolph. Turan now understands how the sacred relic works. Even though he doesn't know much about the Wave Knight, he can tell the mimic power is definitely active. However, this strength is slowly fading and will probably run out in about 30 minutes. Turan looks down at the fallen man and sees his chest and lungs have been punctured. He realizes there's absolutely nothing he can do to help him. The man begs to be saved, but it's just impossible for Turan. As the man begs for his life, what little strength he has left fades away, and he dies. Turan notes that even someone as strong as Perga didn't stand a chance inside this labyrinth. And it wasn't just him. All of his subordinates and allies met the exact same tragic fate. Now, they'll all serve as a mana feast for Turan, who remembers Perga as a cruel man who didn't care about the lives of commoners or knights. Even so, Perga still fought to the very end against the dangers of the labyrinth. Turan begins to absorb Perga's mana, thinking he won't be forgetting his name anytime soon. He completely drains the mana from all the fallen and everything else around him. Afterward, Turan looks at the sacred compass and notices several different colors on it. He's curious about what it would be like to use multiple bloodlines at once, but decides it's best to save that for later. The important thing is that he's now at least twice as strong as he was when he first entered the labyrinth. Turan has obtained a level of power that would take an ordinary noble 100 years to build up, and he knows he needs to ditch the tool if he wants to avoid being hunted by the Zahars. He also needs to clean up his tracks, so he decides to use tracking magic to find and erase any trace of his presence. Using his power, Turan begins destroying everything he touched that could identify him. One by one, all proofs of his presence in the labyrinth vanish. At the end of the day, he actually managed to defeat the boss of the labyrinth. Now Taran is standing in front of that massive door once again. He wonders if all he needs to do now is push it open. And he's right, the door swings open with a simple push. But what lies on the other side doesn't make Taran excited at all. All he sees is an empty throne and a portal in the middle of the room that seems to be the exit. Near the throne, there is a neatly kept book. The book catches Taran's attention, and he realizes it's an experimental log on the Night Hunter's ascension process. With the instructions in this book, a class change would actually be possible. The material contains formulas and records, but Taran realizes he wouldn't be able to pull off the process all on his own. The document also showed how the portal was programmed to open as soon as it detected a compatible target. The creator had even added a function to pull only that specific target inside. Reading this, he realized the Night Hunter class was actually a combination of Hunter, Stalker, Shadow, and Alchemist. Now it made sense why he had felt such a strong urge to come in here earlier. He looked over the list of required ingredients, which called for items like parts from a rot-jaw monster. It also required genetic material from giants. Mana would be used as the power source, which could solve the lifespan issue through a hibernation process. He realized what he was holding was the ascension of the Earth Mother Goddess, a previous experiment that had failed. Almost everything in it seemed impossible to understand, but one thing was certain. The creator's goal was to make a Night Hunter, and because of the sacred relic, the Gate had mistaken him for a candidate who possessed all 4 bloodlines. Even the Flame Madman had claimed a god revealed a method to artificially acquire a bloodline. As he jumped into the whirlpool, he wondered if it was actually possible to permanently gain a bloodline like that. After passing through the whirlpool, he was spat out into a desert. Looking around, he figured he was somewhere on the outskirts of Banifal. Right then, words began to write themselves in the sand. His eagle was absolutely furious since they were over 2 days late. He calmed the eagle down, adjusted his backpack, and got ready to set off. Holding on to his mystical beast's talon, he took off toward his next destination. The eagle flew fast, kicking up a massive cloud of dust across the desert. As they flew, he planned his next move after he eliminated one of the candidates close to the Zahar leader. He would need to leave the desert for a few months, at least until things cooled down. After that, he planned to resume his search for clues about his mother. He pointed the eagle in the direction they needed to go, choosing that path first. They kept traveling, and suddenly, the landscape shifted into a frozen wasteland. They had reached the gray area, the old battlefield where Arabian and Zahar once went to war. Looking down, he was surprised to see a massive crowd of people on the move. It looked like everyone was fleeing from something. It was clear they were abandoning the gray city of Kalamoth. The few remaining guards in the area were also shocked to see a visitor arrive. A strange young man with an eagle on his shoulder and unusual clothes definitely stood out. The guards stared at his face, and they seemed to recognize him from somewhere. They bowed, apologized, welcomed him, and asked if he belonged to one of the great noble families. He realized their attitude shifted because they noticed he was a mage. He made a mental note to buy simpler clothes next time to avoid drawing attention, but simply replied that he was just a traveler. When he asked the guards for lodging from the city's lord, they replied that the city no longer had a ruler. With his head bowed, the guard explained that the city lord had recently died during an attack by dark elves from the west. He added that there were currently no nobles or knights ruling the region. Suddenly, the guard dropped to his knees and began to beg at his feet. The guard desperately begged him to become the new lord of the city. Roy is caught completely off guard, since he was just passing through to finish his mission. He thinks this request is way too heavy of a burden, especially since he doesn't want to get tied down to a place like this. Still, he can't just ignore the terrible situation they're in. So, Roy asks the guard to tell him the whole story first. In another room, the man starts explaining that it all began 3 weeks ago. Some monster hunters were found dead on the road west of town, and their steel weapons had been sliced clean in half with a single blow. Since the spot is only a day's journey away, they sent 2 knights to investigate, but it's been 3 days and neither of them has returned. The man explains that even the Lord's son went west with a group of knights, and not a single one came back. Only one knight managed to crawl back, severely injured, and before he died, the only word he could squeeze out was spirit. Because of that, everyone fled out of fear that these creatures would come and devour the remaining villagers. When Roy asks about the neighboring towns, the young man replies that they sent out several messengers begging for help, but every single request was rejected. Roy thinks that the other towns are probably just afraid of being attacked too, and he can't really blame them for making the logical choice. Roy stands up from his chair and says he understands the situation, but he feels like this problem is just too big for him to handle. The young man drops to his knees begging for mercy, saying that the sheep in the valley desperately need a shepherd. This reminds Roy of a time when a woman explained to him how nobles and peasants are like sheep. Roy asks if that kind of comparison is common around these parts. The young man says yes, explaining that everyone there uses those terms. The nobles are the shepherds, the knights are the sheepdogs, and the commoners are the flock of sheep. Roy thinks that maybe his mother was born here, or at least lived in this region for a while. He bends down to grab his bag, shows a portrait of a woman to the young man, and asks if he recognizes her, a girl named Biji, around 20 years old. The young man apologizes, saying he doesn't recognize her, but offers to put up search posters all over town. Roy realizes that if he wants to find his mother, he has to save this town first. He tells the young man that he can't become the lord of the town. However, he agrees to act as their protector. Hearing this, the young man is incredibly relieved and happy. Roy announces to the villagers that he will stay for a while to protect the town until the threat from the west is gone. A young man in the crowd mutters that their savior has finally arrived to help them, but someone else chimes in, saying that while he might be good-looking, monsters aren't going to run away just because of his looks. Right then, someone yells at the pessimist to shut up and show some respect to their protector. Roy realizes they aren't mocking him, they're just terrified. The villagers don't want to get their hopes up only to be disappointed again. He figures that to calm the sheep, the shepherd needs to show his strength, so he decides to give them a demonstration of his power. The crowd immediately stops arguing to watch what Roy is about to do. Roy raises his hand to channel his energy, deciding to do just a small test. First, he starts compressing the fire as much as possible. Right after, he lowers the temperature of the flame. Since he doesn't harbor any ill will toward the villagers, he decides to focus on putting on a spectacular visual show. A massive explosion of light and energy bursts out a moment later. Roy expands the range of his magic as far as it can go. The released power is so intense that the surrounding villagers have to shield their faces. After a few moments, people start looking up to see what happened. The villagers are completely stunned, whispering that the sky itself looks like it's on fire. Everyone starts cheering, finally realizing they're actually going to make it. Looking down, Turan realizes this alone is enough to send the crowd into absolute ecstasy, or at least that's what he thinks. In reality, they're still facing a mountain of problems, endless meetings, and the freezing cold. Things are escalating fast, and if he doesn't cut the meeting short, it'll drag on until tomorrow. Turan silences the room by announcing he'll handle the food shortage himself. They all trust him completely, but nobody has any idea how their protector plans to pull this off. His plan is to herd the local wildlife straight to the city, use them to make soup for everyone, and then salt the leftover meat for the winter. It's hard for the locals to imagine that someone so powerful would use godlike powers for such a mundane chore. Turan explains that the northern nobles do the exact same thing, casting lightning over fields after a harvest, just to fertilize the soil. What he's doing is no different, so he hops onto his eagle and takes off. From up in the sky, it's clear that all those glowing spots in the mountains are animals. Using his power, he orders them all to move in one direction and wait right in front of the city wall. After giving the order, Turan flies over the area to make sure they're actually listening. Looking down, he thinks this isn't much harder than herding normal sheep. When the mountain folk who are used to nothing but hunger and freezing cold see the massive herd, they're completely blown away. They can't believe their eyes and wonder why their old lords never did anything like this for them. They assume Turan must be an incredibly powerful mage, and they immediately start butchering the animals to distribute the meat. Standing in front of a massive estate, Turan orders them to open the doors to house anyone who lost their home. The order leaves everyone confused, and they wonder where the lord of the house is supposed to live. They're stunned when Turan says the town hall is plenty for him since it already has a bed. The people whisper about how merciful their master is, giving up his own comfort to feed and shelter them all. Honestly, Turan doesn't care about the worship. He just wants the city back to normal so he can search for clues about his mother. News of his incredible deeds quickly spreads across the entire region. At Biggin Castle, a messenger informs the city lord that the new protector has already sent out trade caravans. The Lord of Biggin listens to the report and asks how old this new protector is. Word also reaches Balin Castle, where they whisper about the kid who used a spell that lit up the entire sky. They figure someone that young with that much power must have either gotten incredibly lucky or been trained by a major family since childhood. Meanwhile, over at Haran Castle, they're complaining about how this is the worst possible time for him to show up alongside Arabian's army. Since every region knows him by a different name, it's hard to pin down which family he actually belongs to. While Turan keeps running things in the city, both enemies and allies decide it's best to just play along for now. Without him even knowing, the rulers of the Grey Zone end up recognizing Turan as the rightful protector of Kalamaf. As he plans his next moves, Turan keeps looking at the portrait of his mother. There are 8 cities and over 100 villages in this region, and he knows there's a chance she's somewhere in this massive territory. Suddenly, an aide rushes in with some new information. The man apologizes for last week's false alarms, but guarantees that this lead is the real deal. It's about a traveler named Igon, who claims a woman looking exactly like the portrait stayed at his inn 18 years ago. Turan is thrilled because the timing matches up perfectly with when his mother went missing. Just then, a crowd gathers around him to thank him for the food and shelter. Turan patiently listens to each of them, but his only priority today is talking to that traveler to find out if he really met his mother. The man explains that before he lost everything, he used to run an inn. Back then, the city was in total chaos because of a war between 2 major families. No one knew when the next sudden attack would happen, and everyone lived in constant fear. It was during this exact time that a young woman showed up at his inn. He remembers she looked about 20 years old and was heavily pregnant. She seemed incredibly nervous, like she was running from someone. At the time, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of man would abandon such a beautiful woman in her condition. When Taran asks why he thought she'd been abandoned, the man explains that he overheard her touching her belly and talking to herself. The man repeats her exact words, which were a plea to her unborn child, begging him to please not grow up to be like his father. He goes on to say that after that, she asked for directions to the west, clearly not being from around there. Her horse also looked like it came from somewhere far away. It had a brilliant golden coat, and you could tell from a mile away that it was a magnificent breed. Later, back in his room, Taran thinks it's still too early to jump to conclusions, but he admits it's highly likely that woman really was his mother. Still, he doesn't understand what she meant by begging her child not to turn out like his father. Suddenly, Taran notices some movement next to him and looks over. It's the eagle, writing down a question to ask if he's in pain. After he says he's fine, the eagle writes that he always gets sad whenever he talks about BJ. Taran is impressed by how perceptive the eagle is and asks if she remembers his mother, but she shakes her head no. He gently pets the bird and says they're actually pretty similar, since he hasn't had a mother for a long time either. The eagle stares at Taran for a moment after hearing this. Right after that, she starts writing again. She shows Taran her message, which says that her name is now BJ. Taran is completely confused by this. The eagle explains that she wants to be called BJ because he gets sad thinking about how BJ isn't around anymore. He asks if she's trying to replace his mother, but warns her that names shouldn't be chosen lightly. The eagle writes back, saying she has thought it through and really wants to be named BJ. Taran gives in and says that if she wants it that badly, then from now on her name is BJ, which makes the eagle incredibly happy. He tells her he's counting on her from here on out. Taran opens the window and says they've rested long enough. He holds onto the eagle, and the two take off into the sky to go on patrol. Looking up, the civilians cheer for him, shouting for him to protect their city forever. Hearing this, Taran thinks to himself that he can't stay here forever, and leaving later is just going to be a pain. That's exactly why he never wanted to put down roots anywhere. With that, the two of them begin their actual patrol. He focuses on sensing everything around him. Taran notices he can't feel the presence of any dark elves and wonders if they've already left. If they really did leave, that's going to be a problem too, because if the enemies were still here, they could just defeat them all. But if they've relocated, they could strike back at any moment. As he looks to the side, he senses something strange. He feels the presence of a mage with at least double his own mana. Suddenly, that powerful presence starts rushing straight toward him. Taran reacts instantly and tells the eagle to fly south immediately. As the mage gets closer, Taran recognizes his flying style. He's shocked when he realizes who it actually is. The mage who was scaring him is Mesa. She's also surprised to run into Taran there. The two of them head down and land on the ground. Mesa says it's only been 3 months since they last saw each other, but notes that he's changed a lot. She tells him he looks like a completely different person now. She says he looks like a real adult. Wanting some attention, the eagle pecks at Taran. The bird writes down a message asking who that woman is. Seeing this, Taran introduces them to each other. BJ the eagle gets all proud when they praise her for knowing how to write. Mesa says their bond is beautiful and mentions she'd love to find a companion like that too. Right after, she asks what Taran is doing there, since traveling around this region is dangerous lately. Taran spends a long time explaining the whole situation to her. Mesa says she gets it and thinks her people might be to blame, since a necromancer managed to escape when they destroyed an underground kingdom. She explains that this necromancer is likely the culprit, having fled east to build up his army while hiding in the land of the blind dwarves. Taran asks if she's talking about the blind dwarves from the legends. Mesa says yes, and is relieved to hear he didn't go any further east, explaining they can't enter the gray zone for a few reasons. Taran asks if the reason they can't go in there is Zahar, and Mesa confirms that's exactly it. She says she has to go because she's been away for too long. As she says goodbye, Mesa says she wants to hear more about Taran's travels when they get the chance. Then she takes off and flies back to where she came from. Looking back, Taran notices something. The eagle is writing on the ground again. The message says that Mesa's inner self suits her too. Taran asks the eagle if she would have chosen Mesa if she had seen the mage first. Flustered, the eagle writes that she chose Taran, and Mesa wouldn't stand a chance because he makes her happy. After that, Taran thinks the situation still warrants some thought. He finds himself wondering about one specific thing. He wants to understand why both he and Mesa are compatible with the eagle. Sometime later, Taran is already back in Kalamov. He's training his magic until someone announces that noble visitors are arriving. Noticing Taran's confusion, the messenger explains that there are several nobles. They are representatives from some of the neighboring cities. As soon as they enter, the leader of the group greets Taran and asks to be received as guests. Taran replies that he will host them, but first wants to know why they came looking for him. The man bearing a crest steps forward and says he will speak on behalf of everyone there. He reveals they came to propose a marriage alliance between their 7 families and the Lord of Kalamov. They want to offer their daughters as concubines, claiming they are all beautiful, well-educated, and will help his family prosper. Taran realizes they only showed up to get a piece of the pie now that they know the threat from the west is gone. One of the nobles points out that you need loyal knights to rule, and that uniting their bloodlines would create a powerful alliance. Turan thanks them for the offer but politely declines. Instead, he makes them a counteroffer. Whichever family finds the most valuable info about a woman who passed through here around 20 years ago will win the right to rule Kalamaf. The nobles are completely baffled. They can't believe he's willing to give up an entire city just for info on one woman. But Turan adds one more condition. The new ruler must swear to protect the people of Kalamaf, or they'll lose the right to govern. One of the nobles asks why he cares so much about that, especially since he's already done way more for the locals than anyone expected. Turan just smiles and says he doesn't really know why either. He says that at the end of the day, he's just a simple valley shepherd. To himself, he thinks that all he ever wanted was to be a good shepherd and take care of his sheep. But suddenly something catches his eye up ahead. He senses the massive aura of an incredibly strong knight who just showed up at the city hall unannounced. Realizing someone might be breaking in, Turan leaps across the rooftops, rushing to stop the intruder. The moment he arrives, he calls out to get the knight's attention. The man slowly turns around to face him. And when Turan sees who the visitor is, he freezes in absolute shock. Standing right there in front of him is Kiorn.